Chapter 41. The Fight of Shadows. Izuku followed Todoroki back to the audience stands. From the volume of cheering, something had just happened. Peering over the railing, it turned out the fight was already over. Kaminari had lost and was completely wrapped in the hair of his opponent. The long green thorn-like hairs of the girl Kaminari had fought had extended well beyond their previous length to tie and lift him up. There was also a bunch of separate hair rising from the surface of the arena like a wall or a shield. Izuku might have licked his lips, but his taste buds were still only interested in the power they had witnessed with Todoroki's iceberg. The next fight was bound to be more interesting anyway. Izuku took his seat next to Tenya. "How did it go?" Tenya whispered. Izuku sighed and shook his head. It's better than before, but he is still resistant to thinking differently. At least he admitted the risk of what happened with his quirk. He met his father like I feared. Izuku grit his teeth together. I really want to drop that man from his pedestal. Be careful not to do anything stupid. Whatever he might have done behind the scenes, he is still the number 2 hero. Even if you had evidence, he probably has just as many lawyers as your father. Izuku brushed his chin as he watched Cementos clear and fix the arena with his quirk. "Don't," Tenya said. "What?" "You have that look in your eyes. You are plotting something. Is that a problem?" "It is if you get burned." Actually, that could be really useful, though with people's biases not as effective as you might think." "Izuku, stop," Tenya commanded. Something in his voice reflected genuine worry, even fear, which brought Izuku out of his thoughts. "Sorry," Izuku said. "Didn't mean to worry you. So you won't get yourself burned by Endeavor?" "I'll try to avoid anything with permanent consequences." "Izuku." "Tenya, do you think I would choose to get myself seriously hurt?" "Depends. Are you calling Todoroki a friend yet?" "Okay, everyone." Present mic drowned out any further attempt at conversation. We have 2 more matches left for the first round. The next one is Fumikage Tokoyami from the Class 1A. Facing him is Shirhai Kurwaro from Class B. Tokoyami's opponent was an interesting case. His hair was almost as white as Izuku's, but the rest of him was completely black, not like someone with African heritage black like Tokoyami's raven black feathers. It would have been difficult to distinguish any features as Kurwaro's skin seemed to suck in all light that hit it, making him seem faceless, especially from a distance. It almost seemed like someone wanted to arrange a fight between shadows for people's entertainment. "I should go get ready for my fight," Tenya said and got up. "Don't," he emphasized, "get in a fight with Endeavor while I'm away." "I'll try. Don't lose." Tenya shook his head as he left. Izuku focused on the fight. He hadn't had much chance to train or fight with Tokoyami besides the major exceptions of USJ and the first day, but considering Dark Shadow's speed and strength, Kurwaro wouldn't have much chance trying to fight in a direct physical brawl. So much would depend on his quirk and how he used it. Now, Izuku didn't want to make assumptions, but usually physical changes caused by a quirk had some connection to the power, and Kurwaro did not exactly seem like someone with a light-producing power that would give him an advantage over Dark Shadow. Midnight started the fight. Tokoyami did not hesitate. Dark Shadow launched from his chest like he was shot out of a cannon. Kurwaro didn't even have time to move in the instant the quirk took to stretch across the arena. It seemed like Dark Shadow would throw him out in a single move. The quirk collided with his opponent and kept moving, but without Kurwaro. In fact, he was nowhere to be seen. Dark Shadow stopped at the edge of the arena and turned up to look around for his enemy, but he wasn't visible at all, despite the flat arena not having anywhere to hide. Then again, Might Knight and Cementos did not appear confused and did not disqualify Kurwaro for leaving the arena. So where was he? Could it have been an invisibility quirk? Something like that could have definitely come with mutations in the skin and light absorption, but Kurwaro's clothes had disappeared too. What else could it have been, and what would Kurwaro do next? What would Izuku have done in his position? Izuku's gaze moved to Tokoyami, still attached to the stretched Dark Shadow. Kurwaro appeared out of Dark Shadow right next to Tokoyami, launching himself at Tokoyami and delivering a powerful punch in Tokoyami's stomach that made him bend over. "Fumi!" Dark Shadow shouted and rushed back towards Tokoyami to attack Kurwaro. Kurwaro swung his fist again, delivering a blow under Tokoyami's beak. Tokoyami fell backwards on his rear. Then Dark Shadow was on Korwaro. Korwaro jumped aside seemingly to dodge Dark Shadow, but it was clearly a pointless attempt from the beginning. He held his arm out so it touched the attacking Dark Shadow first and was sucked into the quirk. It was like he had just completely melded with the black mass that formed Dark Shadow. The quirk didn't even have the time to be confused as Korwaro emerged from his other side and delivered a kick to Tokoyami's head while he was still getting up from another fall. Izuku grimaced, remembering what he had done to Hitoshi and what it could have caused. Man, Dark Shadow can't do anything to that guy, Kirishima said, clearly feeling a bit sorry for Tokoyami in this case. Doesn't seem so, Izuku agreed. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem Tokoyami knows what to do either. He's relying too much on Dark Shadow. That first attack might have caught him by surprise, but unless that guy's quirk enhances his strength, Tokoyami should have been able to even out the situation by now. You know not everyone has your skill with stuff like this. That's just because he hasn't trained enough, or the right way, Izuku said, then fell quiet, brushing his cheek. This lasted for a moment as Dark Shadow repeatedly failed to catch Korwaro and Tokoyami struggled to defend against the rapid attacks. Kirishima looked at Izuku for a while, longer than Hitoshi would have, but figured out Izuku's thoughts eventually. Is he going to join us tomorrow? I wouldn't be opposed to it. It's not bad to have him around, if he wants to be, and Hitoshi is getting tired of you tossing him around. Sorry. Don't apologize for doing what you were supposed to. As they talked, Tokoyami had realized what needed to be done and convinced Dark Shadow to go back inside so Korwaro couldn't merge with him. Depending what else his quirk could do, the fight might have just turned into another basically quirkless brawl. Unfortunately, that seemed to still leave Tokoyami in the weaker position. He displayed basic fighting skills, but his movements were awkward. It seemed like he was out of balance trying to fight without Dark Shadow being out. Korwaro was really a perfect match for him. It certainly didn't show Tokoyami's, and especially not Dark Shadow's abilities in the best light to the audience. Even without Dark Shadow, Korwaro still showed off his quirk by diving into Tokoyami's shadow to avoid a counterattack, only to emerge at high speed and deliver a rapid upward strike. Punches like that got the strongest reactions from the audience, especially his classmates, but what less people paid attention to was that the fight was moving towards the edge of the arena. That was really the best way to end a fight for anyone whose quirk didn't allow for an instant knockout. Izuku glanced at Kirishima. Instant knockout without brain damage, or worse preferably. Tokoyami was now at the very edge of the arena, a single step away from losing. He did the sensible thing and tried to move sideways to get out of the precarious position, but Korwaro matched his movements to deny any escape. Looks bad, Kirishima said. He might lose. He's in a bad position, but not hopeless, Izuku said. Considering their performance so far, it is unlikely that Tokoyami could fight his way out of this hand-to-hand. But if he stays calm and works with Dark Shadow smartly, won't that guy just get into Dark Shadow the moment he comes out? If he tries to attack directly, yes. That's why it is so important that they stay calm and think through what to do. Tokoyami dodged an attack, stumbling right on the edge of the arena. He tried to push off and rush towards the middle. That was his chance, but nothing more happened. Korwaro was able to recover from the momentum of his previous attack and grapple Tokoyami before he got away. Tokoyami somehow stayed on his feet like most wouldn't, but it wasn't going to be enough. Izuku sighed. Dark Shadow burst out of Tokoyami, pushing Korwaro away from him in an instant.
Yes.
Kirishima cheered. Maybe. No, Izuku said. For a moment, Dark Shadow's assault seemed to be efficient and was pushing Korwaro away. The force of the impact could have certainly stunned him. After several meters, Dark Shadow extended his shadowy limb to get a proper grasp of the enemy, but like with every attempt before, Korwaro disappeared into Dark Shadow. Tokoyami had learned enough to raise his arms in defense before Korwaro had a chance to emerge and attack. It worked, except for one little detail. Tokoyami is out of bounds, Midnight declared. The winner is sure. High Korwaro. Despite defending against the attack quite well, Tokoyami had never gotten properly away from the edge. Too focused on the attack, his foot had slid out of the ring. Man, that sucks, Kirishima said. One of them had to lose, Izuku shrugged. That's the whole point of competition. Yeah, but he never really lost the fight. His foot was just a little over the line. Those are the rules of the competition that they both knew beforehand. Knocking your opponent out isn't the only goal with every fight, even outside competitions. That's how I almost lost with Toshi. He used his brain and my rush to get him out. Without my jets, he might have succeeded. Even if he didn't beat me in the fight, that would still have been a win. Tokoyami could have done the same, but made the wrong move, or at least Dark Shadow did. I see, Yaoyorozu spoke up. That is what you thought Dark Shadow could do. I don't follow? Kirishima said. It is quite simple. Since Dark Shadow couldn't safely attack their opponent, Tokoyami should have used it to push himself away from the edge. That way he could have used Dark Shadow for mobility, but his opponent wouldn't have had a chance to merge with it. Something like that, Izuku said and glanced at Kirishima. Sometimes attacking directly or taking the hit isn't the best option, especially if you are literally balancing on an edge. Right. Kirishima, when did you get a new sensei? Be careful or Mr. Aizawa might get jealous. Kaminari commented with a sly grin. Kirishima stared at him, confused. When he showed he was worth the effort, Izuku answered in his place. You should watch out, or he'll leave you behind even more than you already are. Ouch, Shiro said. Maybe you should ask Todoroki for some ice on that burn. At least most of the class could take that comment with good humor. Tokoyami left the arena with Dark Shadow out in his smallest size and leaning against Tokoyami's chest. He was even petting Dark Shadow's head. Izuku just hoped Tokoyami wouldn't need a quirk psychiatrist. Izuku had a strong hunch of who that would be. And now the final fight of the first round, Midnight announced. From Class 1A, Tenya Ida. Part of Izuku was happy as Tenya got one of the loudest reactions from the audience, second only to Todoroki. The other part of him was annoyed because he knew why that was, and the people certainly weren't cheering for Tenya and Todoroki because of their own efforts. And opposing him is a highly talented student from Class 1B who was admitted to UA with high-standing recommendations, Juzo Hananuki. Tenya's opponent was a pale blonde-haired boy with a minor mutation of having his teeth visible on the outside where his lips would normally have been. Izuku dug through his memories for information about the boy from earlier competitions. Tenya might be in trouble, he concluded. How so? Kirishima asked. I doubt that guy will even have time to see him coming. That's assuming he can run at full speed. Hananuki is the one who did something to the ground during the cavalry battle. Right? I noticed something strange, but you made us fly before it reached us. Something Tenya can't do. I fear he might be just as bad a matchup to Tenya as Korwaro was for Tokoyami. So they were just unlucky. Yes, though in life you sometimes need to face people you're a bad match against, better here than in an actual battle. At least in the tournament, the worst you can lose are more chances to show off what you can do. Even then you can take lessons from your mistakes. Speaking of which, Izuku looked back at Tokoyami who had just rejoined them. He was still holding Dark Shadow like a crying child, quite literally.
I'm sorry, Fumi.
I didn't mean to make you lose. I just wanted to get him off you. Now people are going to think you can't fight. As much as it pains me, I fear they would be right. Without you I could not do much.
I'm sorry.
It is not your fault. I have put too much of our training on your wings. Izuku sighed, wishing UA at least gave out degrees in quirk psychology. Then again, he didn't let himself sugarcoat even harsh truths. Tokoyami, he said, getting the two's attention, did you tell Dark Shadow to launch that last attack? No, I told him to stay in. Then that final losing move was his fault, Izuku said. Even though Dark Shadow lacked a face, he somehow managed to express even more grief. Don't try to convince him otherwise. Both of you, can only improve if you recognize what you did wrong. I knew it, Dark Shadow cried out. That doesn't change the fact you would have lost anyway, with the way you were fighting. Hey, you can't talk to Fumi like that, Dark Shadow said, breaking off from his crying. I call it like I see it. If you want the best for Tokoyami, you can't deny things just because you don't like to hear them. You are right, Tokoyami agreed. In trying to control Dark Shadow's power, I have failed to train myself adequately. Yes, you have. We'll start fixing that tomorrow, Izuku said and turned back to face the arena. Tenya was presently running away from his opponent, with a spreading patch of liquefied arena pooling around said opponent who was half sunken into it like he was in a swimming pool. "This is going to be great," Kirishima declared, still not looking at the fight. "You get to train at Midoriya's place. He has helped me improve my fighting more than UA." There was a long silence, except for the rest of the noises in the stadium. "What is he talking about, Fumi?" "Midoriya said you could come train with us tomorrow. Ain't that great?" "You don't have to come," Izuku said without looking at them. "But if you don't want to be dependent on Dark Shadow alone, you should. It would be an honor." "Hey, why does Tokoyami get to go?" Kaminari complained. "Because I say so," Izuku responded, more focused on Tenya's fight. He had been driven near the edge of the arena already. He'd have to do something very bold to grasp a win. Backed into a corner, literally, Tenya crouched like he was preparing for a sprint. His engines, properly cooled thanks to Todoroki, flashed, and he wasn't there anymore. Knowing what to expect, Izuku just about followed what happened. Pushed forward by his engines, Tenya initially streamed over the surface, reaching Hananuki, who had no time to react. As Tenya's foot sunk into the liquid arena in front of him, the other delivered a full-force kick that sent him backwards with devastating force. Unfortunately, he was still half inside the arena and Tenya couldn't actually fly with his engines. He was already dipping into the liquid arena and the impact took most of his momentum. As soon as he sunk deeper into the liquid, he began tumbling across the surface until he stopped some distance from Hananuki. Both of them were left floating on the surface, which began solidifying around them. Seeing this, Tenya scrambled to get away, but could only make sure his head remained above the surface as the arena hardened around him. Hananuki did not even move as he was left half inside the arena. "Well," Present Mike looked for the right words. "Did one of them win?" "I don't think so," Aizawa said. "While Hananuki appears to be unconscious, Ida is also effectively pinned. If nothing happens by the time Midnight does the count, it will be a draw." Midnight moved to check on both students. The stadium was quiet, like actually quiet. Cementos too joined Midnight on the arena, probably intending to free Ida and Hananuki with his quirk once Midnight declared the match over. 5. 6. Hananuki's head moved and Midnight fell quiet. Slowly the concrete around Hananuki softened on he dragged himself up with some effort. His feet shaky as he pushed first on his knees and then to his feet. Midnight raised her hand. "Hananuki is still conscious and able to move. He is the winner." Izuku couldn't join the cheering of the audience around them. In the end, only Todoroki and Kirishima had moved on from their class, and he could only watch as Hananuki freed Tenya from the concrete. "What's wrong?" said the infinitely irritating voice of Monoma, who was hanging over the divider between the audience segments for the different classes. "Are you surprised that the mighty Class A is barely staying in the tournament? What do you want?" Izuku said, not bothering to look at the quirk copier. "Our fight is next, so choose your words wisely. You really trying to intimidate us? So typical for Class A. You think yourself so much better that you can do whatever you want. No, just that there is something wrong with you to constantly act like this. Did your parents drop you on your head as a kid? Brain damage doesn't always make people nicer, you know. I guess we are going to find out after your so-called friend recovers." Such brutality from the supposed #1 class. Izuku finally looked up. Neither Hitoshi nor Tenya was there and others would not have recognized the signs or moved in time to prevent Izuku from taking out Monoma. The idea was certainly attractive. If you think this is going to somehow help you in our fight, you are wrong. You're only digging your own grave deeper. It must have been something in Izuku's voice as Monoma hesitated with his response until a giant hand slapped him from behind. An orange-haired girl peeked over the divider, and after a few seconds Izuku even remembered her name, Kendo. "Sorry about him. We really don't know what's wrong with him, but he is a good planner. He can just get a bit too competitive. More like self-destructive," Izuku muttered. "Did you say something?"
No.
"Has he considered what I suggested before about trying to use our quirks together?" "I don't think so. It seems like quite a big ask." "It really isn't. I'm not even asking to borrow his quirk exactly. At least that wasn't necessary to start with." "Still seeking to get at our quirks," Monoma said, barely audible behind the divider. "Did your classmates already figure out to avoid getting theirs taken?" probably keeping their distance and warning people to stay out of arm's reach. Izuku was surprised to realize that behind the annoying tone Monoma's voice had a tint of bitterness. Maybe he was not just mocking Izuku. Kendo looked behind the divider at Monoma and then shrugged her shoulders at Izuku. He doesn't have to be interested in what you suggest. Hope you understand. We will have a short break and then move on with the second round, Midnight announced. The fighters for the next match should proceed to their ready positions. Izuku got up from his seat and headed for the door. I guess we'll have to continue this talk in the arena. He encountered Tinya as he entered the corridor. The speedster was walking with his shoulders slumped and chin down. Izuku stopped just as they were passing each other. Decent job, Izuku said, approaching him. Just hesitated too long before making your move. I know. I was too focused on avoiding his quirk's effect until it was too late to safely reach him. Your quirk works great for running, but it won't keep you flying for long. Maybe sliding would work. You should probably consider that with your support equipment. That is probably a good idea, but shouldn't you concentrate on your own fight? I am, but it's not the fight I'm interested in. Just have to be careful at the start in case he copies someone else's quirk before the fight. Don't worry about your loss. Your strengths are easy for people to see even besides family connections. This tournament isn't going to hold you back. I know, but I still failed. More training, Izuku said and kept walking. Speaking of which, Tokoyami will join us tomorrow. Good to hear you are comfortable enough to have him around. And Dark Shadow. He knows part of the darkness I have to walk through. You even sound like him. Izuku chuckled once as he walked out of Tinya's sight. Chapter 42. Breaking Mind and Arm. Izuku stepped onto the arena. It was a lot quieter compared to previous fights. Monoma entered from the opposite side with a wide smile and generally friendly expression. Izuku was immediately on alert. Even present Mike couldn't distract him from that. We are going to start the second round with a fight between Izuku Midoriya of Class 1A, who already demonstrated his extensive fighting skills in the first round. His opponent from Class 1B is Nito Monoma, who showed he can have more tricks up his sleeves than one might expect. To be fair, you could say the same for both of them, Aizawa added. Either one could surprise us. It really is great to be here, even if having so many people watching us makes me a bit nervous, Monoma said, still with his fake smile. He raised his hand, offering it for a handshake. Let's have a good match. Izuku's hand inched a little upwards before he stopped and hardened his stare. He wasn't going to fall for such a simple trick. What's wrong? I thought a handshake is the proper way to start a friendly match. It is going to be friendly, right? Monoma made his voice shake like he was getting afraid while still keeping his hand up ready for a handshake, making sure everyone saw it. Please, I don't want to go to the hospital like your previous opponent. Can you believe that Midoriya kid? Someone in the audience shouted. How could anything be heard understandably that far from such crowd still baffled Izuku? Really? He steals quirks. Did you expect him to be some beacon of morality? Izuku sighed. You can drop the act. Both of us know you were just trying to touch me to copy my quirks. You might know, Monoma whispered, maintaining his fake expression, but they won't. For people like us, people are more than willing to assume the worst. So want to convince them more, or? Izuku kept staring at Monoma for a moment, then smirked, for more than one reason. He raised his hand to accept Monoma's handshake. And you already know that both our quirks work through touch, except only one of us can use his after that. Monoma froze still just as he was about to grab Izuku's hand and yanked his back. What's wrong? Don't want to start with a friendly handshake after all? Izuku taunted, glancing towards the audience. He wasn't being serious? Some people in the audience at least noticed. I wouldn't shake hands with the quirk stealer either. So one refusing to shake hands shows bad morals, and other refusing is what you would do? At least the whole stadium had one person with potential. Are you ready? Midnight took control of the situation, forcing Izuku to focus on his opponent. Start. I hope I didn't ruin your whole plan, Izuku said, raising his hands in a fighting stance. Then again, you probably already copied someone else's quirk like with Toshi. So whose would you use against me? Either you need to keep your distance and attack from there, or get something that helps you with hand-to-hand combat. As Izuku spoke, Monoma's skin turned into metal, and he charged. Izuku ducked and jumped to the side, avoiding the first punch. And protection from my dragon blades wouldn't hurt either. Smart. You picked a strong quirk, just made one mistake. And what would that be? Monoma asked while swinging at him again. I have trained against basically the same power. You know the guy who beat the guy whose quirk you were using. Izuku dodged effortlessly again and lit a dragon blade formed as a shield. The question is if you are a better fighter than him. So far, I'm not impressed. Don't burn your fingers. He flashed the flaming shield hotter just as Monoma launched another punch, but Monoma didn't pull back or even jolt as his fist hit its mark. The same couldn't be said about Izuku, who got shaken to his core and pushed back. It wasn't as much force as Kirishima could hit with, but still a lot more than someone could do without a quirk. Izuku bit his teeth together from the pain until it eased. Monoma made sure to hold his fist against Izuku's shield for a few seconds as he recovered. You might think less of our class, but is that Kirishima also fireproof? Didn't think so. Monoma launched another punch. Izuku, having seen the limited usefulness of his shield, understood the brute force of the attacks would be too much for him to stop head-on without breaking something. As he recovered from the first attack, there wasn't enough time to properly dodge, so Izuku had to give in and lean back from the attack. As he leaned far enough away from the attacking fist, he shut off his shield and reached his arms backwards. Izuku's hands touched the floor, and he began a backflip. Normally, he would have gone for a simultaneous kick on the chin, but after breaking Hitoshi's, he hesitated rather than going with his instinct. A fraction of a second later, he realized the chin was made of steel. He returned to his feet and had just enough time to dodge the next attack. Monoma was now fighting faster, but also more haphazardly. It wasn't enough, though. After dodging a couple of punches, Izuku jumped backwards, boosting his distance with his jets. You seem to be in a hurry, Izuku said while jogging sideways to keep his distance from the approaching Monoma. Does your copy perhaps have a time limit? Shouldn't have wasted time trying to mess with my reputation, says the coward who is just running away. So now I'm a coward. Wasn't I supposed to be some kind of violent maniac or a thief? You are going to be declared the loser if you just keep running away. The steel was still holding up on Monoma, so Izuku flicked his arm and launched a blue but relatively weak hellfire arrow at him. Monoma dodged the first one, but couldn't change directions before the second one hit. As the smoke cleared, Monoma had been thrown on his back by the impact, but his steel defense was intact, not even a scratch. There was just a little bit of steam rising from where he was hit. You sure you don't want to test if our quirks can work together? Izuku asked, strolling towards Monoma, who scrambled to get up. I'm not going to fall for your trick to take my quirk. If I wanted to take your quirk, I could, and the consequences would be no different than if I tricked you. But fine. I can test all I want to know with Tetsu's quirk while you have it. He said it confidently, but that same quirk meant he didn't have much chance restraining Monoma long enough to test, not physically at least. Luckily that, and his all for one, were exactly the threats Monoma was focused on. He was back on his feet, still steely and visibly tense as Izuku approached. His stance left one of his hands remaining mostly open in a very Bakugo-like way to more easily use his quirk. You should be careful about using your quirk on me, Izuku said. Usually people only have one quirk to copy. You might get more than you can handle, and I won't be responsible for the consequences. You think I couldn't handle your quirk? Monoma responded, too focused on the discussion about their quirks to think of stopping himself. He was left quiet after that, standing still and staring into the empty air. After beating Yaoyorozu with this, I thought you'd be more careful, Izuku said as he stepped in front of Monoma, who couldn't respond. Izuku raised his hand and put it on Monoma's forehead. In battle, you need to watch for more than one threat at a time. Izuku focused on his quirk and those laying within Monoma. At least there were supposed to be more than one. Monoma's skin was still steel, but Izuku could only sense one quirk. There was a strange feeling around it he hadn't experienced before, but there was only one quirk factor, that much he could be certain about. What is he doing? He's taking his quirk. Someone stop him. Silence. Aizawa's voice boomed across the stadium. If you can accept freezing someone inside a glacier during a match and cheer, you have no right to whine at a person's quirk being taken during the match. Izuku wanted to smile hearing his teacher's voice, But at the same time, he could feel Monoma's skin changing under his fingers, and also felt a change in the one quirk in Monoma. He bit his teeth together and frowned as he let go. It would have been too good to be true, Izuku muttered and looked at Monoma, who was still staring into nothingness. Izuku had won. The match would end as soon as he ordered Monoma to leave the arena. It didn't even feel like he had tried, but that was how good Hitoshi's quirk could be. If everyone could just see that. Are you going to do anything with him? Midnight asked, having come closer. I can just do the count. Yeah. Izuku paused mid-response and reached out for her microphone. Can I? What do you want it for? You've heard what people think about me and my quirk, and not just me. She looked at him for several seconds, but eventually nodded and gave him the microphone. Izuku took it but breathed in deep and hesitated for several seconds before bringing it in front of his mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, especially those calling yourself heroes, he was doing his best to keep unnecessary sharpness away from his voice. He really was. I would like to introduce you the quirk brainwashing. For the whole day, you have seen students fight and beat each other with everything from fists to ice and of course with a healthy dose of risking injury to one or the other. You know, a bit like your job, not just restraining villains, but beating them in a risky fight. Wouldn't it be nice to skip that part about risking injury? Izuku made some grand gestures towards Monoma, who was still standing in the exact same spot, not having moved a millimeter. Completely pacified, restrained, and easily to arrest with zero resistance or violence needed. I could make him walk straight to Tartaros itself if I wanted to, and this isn't even the first fight today to be ended by this quirk. You could have this capability for your agency and be backed by the brain and tongue needed to make it efficient. Just send an offer of internship to the owner of this quirk, Hitoshi Shinso of UA Class 1A, and make it more worth his time than any other offers. Do the count, Midnight, Aizawa's tired voice said from the speakers as soon as Izuku stopped. Are you done? Midnight asked. Yes, Izuku handed the microphone back. I hope it mattered. The words alone maybe not, but with the demonstration you put up most certainly yes. A proper visual demonstration can do wonders in getting people's attention. She winked and leaned forward in a posture that pushed her chest outwards, towards a now blushing Izuku. Trust me, I know. She stood back up straight and began counting down towards Monoma's loss while Izuku tried to stop blushing and remind himself of the superficiality of heroes, more focused on visual demonstrations than helping people. 2-1-0. The winner is Izuku Midoriya by a knockout, I think. Izuku raised his hand and flicked a finger at Monoma's forehead hard enough to wake him. Monoma jolted and took several steps before stopping to stare at Izuku. You won, Izuku said. Monoma's stare hardened. Give my quirk back right now. Never took it. I didn't exactly have any use for it in a 1-versus-1 fight. More importantly, your quirk doesn't actually create a copy of people's quirks. It just replicates their effect, or something like that. Still very impressive. It means your quirk is doing all of the things the quirks it copies did. I can't imagine how it does that, but I couldn't even feel the steel quirk in you. Izuku turned away. Since you don't want anything to do with me, I won't bother you about our quirks. Just make sure to not complain when people suspect or fear you because of your quirk. Not when you think the exact same way as they do when it comes to others' quirks. Izuku paused. Also, I was serious about not using your quirk on me. Having multiple quirks can be a strain, and even I need time to adjust when I increase my number. If your quirk tries to copy multiple at once, that could have unexpected consequences. He walked away, not showing any joy at his victory. As far as he was concerned, the whole thing with Monoma had been a total waste of time. Maybe mass-producing copies of quirks would have been too good to be true. Well, at least the sports festival was almost over. He just needed to make sure he wouldn't get buried under a glacier and survive whatever Hitoshi had to say about the stunt he just pulled. Izuku knew he'd either apologize or laugh by the end of it. He met Kirishima in the corridor coming down for his own match. The redhead raised his arm and the two fist bumped as they met. Great match and speech, Kirishima said. Thanks. It was a decent warm-up for our match, I guess. Heh, I still have to win mine first. I have faith in you. Show them how to use your kind of quirk properly. Thanks. I'll do my best. Izuku passed him and continued towards the stairs a bit happier than when he had left the arena. He made sure to walk a bit faster, wanting to see the whole drill versus wall fight. He got back to his class just in time as midnight declared the start of the fight. Kaibara charged forward right away, turning his arms into large drills. Kirishima hardened and also charged, fist raised. It seemed like it was going to be a head-on meeting of brute force. At the last moment, Kirishima twisted his body and shifted to the side to avoid Kaibara's direct attack and deliver a punch from the side. A smart choice made just in case Kaibara could actually hurt him. With Kirishima's ability to hurt Kaibara, there wasn't even that small doubt, so Izuku couldn't claim surprise as Kaibara did the exact same thing in the opposite direction. Both passed each other, pulled out of balance by their overextended punches. Izuku's pin scratched against the paper of his notebook without him even looking at it. While Kirishima corrected his position with great agility, he was still slowed by his hardened state and adjusting it on the move. Kaibara didn't have that problem as his quirk only increased how his body could move. He spun around and launched another attack. Kirishima, having only just steadied his stance, barely had enough time to raise his hardened arms. Kaibara's drilling punch hit right in between them with full force and continued drilling after the initial punch, and drilling and drilling. Kirishima peeked from behind his raised arms, and while it was impossible to see from this far away, he was probably smirking. Thought that wasn't necessarily a very Kirishima thing to do. Apparently, he had gotten an answer to the question about Kaibara's ability to hurt him. Without hesitation, Kirishima's fist launched forward in a counterattack, but using one of his feet as a pivot point, Kaibara used his quirk to literally spin out of the way. He used the momentum to hop beyond arm's reach. As soon as both of his legs were solidly on the floor again, his entire upper body began spinning. Kirishima charged forward to deliver a punch that would end the match no matter how much Kaibara spun, except he had extended his arm out from his spinning body. The spin accelerated his fist to a speed no human could achieve without a suitable quirk, and the two fighters were again on a collision course. It was too late for Kirishima to stop his attack or do anything except maybe increase his hardening. It was hard to say from far away. Kaibara's drill-like hand impacted right in the middle of Kirishima's chest. The speed and sheer momentum of the impact pushed Kirishima back. He slid on the concrete for a couple of meters, but succeeded at staying on his feet. Meanwhile, Kaibara's spin destabilized, and he took several seconds to stop and find his balance. Kirishima bent his upper body back to upright, having been pushed backwards by the impact. With his opponent at a safe distance, the first thing he did was to glance down. There was a large hole torn into his shirt right in the middle of his chest, but there wasn't any sign of even the smallest injury. Kirishima's movements themselves only suggested surprise at most. If there had been any doubt after the first attack, the question between drill and wall had been settled after the second. Wisely, Kirishima quickly moved his attention back to his opponent, holding a proper stance despite his clear advantage. In the meantime, the whole stadium got to hear Kaibara's scream as he held his hand close to his chest, a bit crouched forward protectively. Kirishima dropped his stance and reached one hand forward apologetically as he took a step closer, only stopping as Midnight gestured him to. "Oh great," Izuku sighed. "He's going to blame himself for that." Ashido finished Izuku's thought. "It's just like back in middle school. A lot of other people even blamed him then." Midnight talked to Kaibara and checked on his hand. As Kaibara moved it for her to see better, Izuku could see the whole hand hanging unnaturally, not just from the wrist but the forearm itself. Considering the force of the impact, Izuku was surprised Kaibara's arm was still properly attached on his shoulder. His quirk had to provide some reinforcement to his body, even if it was clearly insufficient. What was he thinking hitting that hard if he couldn't handle it? Izuku muttered. Most likely, Tenya said, he saw Kirishima's endurance before and thought his normal attacks wouldn't work. So he just went all out, not thinking about his limits, Izuku finished. Probably so. You think their quirks would work well combined? I don't think Kaibara is planning to sell his. I know, Izuku sighed. Still, they could be a great match. Imagine Kirishima using that same attack. My bones are hurting just thinking about it. Still no. Izuku turned to look at the arena again and brushed his chin. I wonder what would happen if he had a flexibility-enhancing quirk. Would they work together, or contradict each other? Should I be worried that I'm not even surprised by what Midoriya is saying? Kaminari said. I'm not sure anymore, Zero responded. I just wish I had an extra quirk to sell him, Uraraka muttered. Izuku glanced at her, but was more interested in Tokoyami, who was standing in the shadow of the exit corridor, still holding Dark Shadow in his arms like before. Izuku sighed and turned away from the sunny arena below to step into a literal shadow. How are you doing? He asked. Well enough. I am trying to review my mistakes during our battle. Sorry, Tokoyami. I was actually talking to Dark Shadow. The quirk creature perked up in Tokoyami's arms. I failed Fumi. I don't care what you say about his skills. Now he won't get a good internship. Everyone thinks he has a bad quirk like they did with Shinso after you broke him. Izuku needed a few seconds to pull out the figurative knife Dark Shadow had stabbed his heart with. You'll have new chances to show you are a great quirk. You just need to work with Tokoyami and not blindly attack. Even then, people gotta see how good washing brains could be. Fumi won't have another chance today, and that's what matters to that internship thing. The sleepy man even said this is one of only 3 chances in a lifetime. It's okay, Dark Shadow. We will still become heroes. We just have further to go than we thought. Then shouldn't you get a better intern place? Dark Shadow asked. That would help greatly, but we cannot change it anymore. Why not? Brainwashing got a second chance and third. That is because I could borrow the brainwashing from Toshi without being smashed through the wall by it, Izuku said. Trying to take you from Tokoyami wouldn't work out that well. It's why you wanted to kill me before, remember? Dark Shadow's wings and head flopped down in disappointment. We shall have our new chance in time, Tokoyami assured the Shadow Bird, but Dark Shadow didn't seem to care. You will, Izuku said, and Dark Shadow, you are more than powerful enough to convince people of it. Tokoyami is lucky to have you. Certainly, Tokoyami agreed, but Dark Shadow didn't seem to believe them. For a moment no one said anything until Izuku pulled out a notebook and spoke again. So, if you still want to join us tomorrow for training, I'll text you the address. We usually start at 9 a.m. You can get some good practice with hand-to-hand combat. Not sure yet how to help Dark Shadow train. We appreciate all of the help you are offering. Those who train with you do seem to excel in our practical exercises no matter what kind of shadow the school casts their way. If you are certain you are comfortable with opening your home to us. I have understood that dash. It's okay, Izuku interrupted. Having more people visit makes it feel less empty. I just need to make sure those people don't cast even darker shadows inside. I understand, Tokoyami nodded. So, what's your number? Izuku had just written Tokoyami's phone number down when Kirishima walked past them. He barely acknowledged them, looking at the torn sleeve of his arm and occasionally feeling the much larger hole over his chest. Izuku reached out to grab Kirishima's shoulder just before he got out of arm's reach. He didn't pull hard, but the surprise from the yank was enough to stop Kirishima. He turned to look at Izuku, surprised, but didn't have the time to say the question in his eyes. Punch the wall, Izuku commanded. Chapter 43. Heated meeting. Punch the wall, Izuku commanded Kirishima, pointing at the concrete wall next to them. Why W? Do it, Izuku snapped. Punch the wall. Kirishima was still staring wide-eyed out of confusion. He glanced at the wall before turning back to stare at Izuku. After a few seconds, he turned to face the wall and raised his fist, ready, but gave another questioning glance to Izuku, who nodded. Kirishima's arm hardened as he pulled his fist back. Wait, don't. Izuku yelped. Kirishima blinked. But you told me to. Yes, but don't use your quirk. I don't want to explain to Dad that he needs to pay to repair UA Stadium. Oh, sorry. Just do it. Kirishima's arm returned to normal, and he punched the wall softly, more like a tap, just with a closed fist. Harder, Izuku commanded with a voice that did not allow the words to be questioned. Kirishima did as told, and the second punch actually looked like a punch, but more like a friendly punch to the shoulder of a training buddy. Harder. Do it like you were in an actual fight. Finally, Kirishima swung his arm in a wide arch in a proper punch. It wasn't nearly as hard as he could do even without his quirk, but the sound of impact convinced Izuku it was enough for his needs. This was confirmed as Kirishima started nursing his fist with his other hand. Does it hurt? Izuku asked, trying to keep the most obvious concern away from his voice for the moment. A bit, Kirishima answered. I still don't get why I did that. Do you blame the wall for your hand hurting? What? No, what do you mean? Is it the wall's fault? Your hand hurt punching it? No. Why would it be responsible for what my punch did? It isn't and shouldn't. Remember that when you talk about your fight with Kaibara, he broke his own arm, not you. You were just the wall. Yeah, but
No buts.
you already carry around too much self-doubt, and you need to focus on your next match. Right? Dark Shadow whined. You get to show what you can do beating each other up. Dark Shadow let out another whine that sounded almost like crying. Is he okay? Kirishima asked. Yes, unlike you, they have something to blame themselves for. Izuku glanced at Tokoyami. Sorry, that was the truth. Denying the shadow would not help us step out of it. I don't think you need to worry about it since Midoriya invited you to his place. It's going to be great. Just wait and you'll see. Kirishima gave Tokoyami a thumbs up. At least he had cheered up from just a moment earlier. Tokoyami's expressions were harder to read, but he would probably have smiled if his beak bent that way. So, Kirishima continued, were you in the middle of something? Todoroki's fight is about to start. No, we just finished, Izuku responded and gestured to Tokoyami to follow. You two should come watch rather than stand here, just the two of you. Very well. I hope Todoroki wins quickly so we can get to our fight sooner, Kirishima declared as they walked. We spar every weekend, Izuku reminded him. That's not the same. This isn't just training. We are going to test our manliness head-on in the arena for victory. You'll have to fight seriously. Why is everyone so interested in getting beaten up seriously? Izuku muttered, wondering how Hitoshi was recovering. You can only get tougher if you get hit, so don't hold back. Izuku sighed. Well, at least that actually works in your case. Just remember people can't see that during the tournament. You aren't going to get any points for getting your ass kicked. Heh. If you can do that, you can have my quirk for the final. Izuku stopped mid-step like he had walked into a wall. Kirishima took 2 steps before realizing and stopping himself. Did you just say what I think you said? Izuku asked. Kirishima tilted his head. Yeah, I guess. I mean, you did it already once during lunch. It isn't a problem, right?
No.
I'm just surprised. You sure? Why not? I didn't even notice when you did it last time. Izuku brushed his eyes and got his hand wet. Did I promise to get you a second quirk yet? You said something about it. Are you going to make that as a bet? No bets, just a promise. Izuku breathed in deep and got back some self-control. I still need to get you that ass-kicking first. I'm not going to make it easy. Just don't break a leg when you do it. That got a laugh out of Izuku, and he patted Kirishima's shoulder as they kept walking. They got back to their class just as Todoroki's fight started and leaned on the railing rather than sit down. As soon as midnight declared the start of the fight, Todoroki launched a stream of ice across the arena. The trio leaning on the railing quickly stepped back, but there was no instant glacier this time. After a few seconds, they dared to move back to see what had happened. A layer of ice had spread across the arena, but at least it had been more restrained this time. Shiozaki had been able to mostly avoid the attack using her hair like legs to quickly move out of the way, but the attack had been too wide. The hair still had to touch the ground to move herself, and the ice had spread from there. The glacier was smaller than before, but she was at the top of it. Some of her green thorny hair had even gone for an attack, reaching towards Todoroki. The furthest strands were only a meter or so away from Todoroki before they were caught in the ice. She's faster than I thought, Izuku commented. Didn't think she'd almost win against Todoroki, Kirishima said. She didn't. She almost reached him, but that alone isn't enough to win against Todoroki, even if he is still only using his ice, crudely. Izuku licked his lips. Apparently it doesn't make you less hungry, yeah. Kirishima had at least enough sense to whisper. HSS. Izuku still hissed back. Right, sorry. Our fight is after the next one. Should we go get ready? Sure, Izuku nodded, smiling as they left. This tournament was turning into a lot of walking back and forth. At least the corridor was clean and quiet, and the company wasn't bad either, though Kirishima was outpacing Izuku, being already a few steps ahead. I can't wait for this fight. There is still a fight before ours. Moving faster isn't going to make it start any sooner, Izuku said and grabbed Kirishima's shoulder to hold him back before he could disappear in the stairway behind a corner. Kirishima stopped and half-turned to face Izuku, a smile on his face. Izuku was going to say something nice about Kirishima's excitement, but the words died in his mouth as a large form appeared behind Kirishima. Endeavor had just stepped around the corner behind Kirishima. His head turned in slow motion until his eyes focused on Izuku. He quickly turned to completely face Izuku as both his arms raised a little, more prepared for a fight than seconds before. It was because of Izuku's quirk, of course, but he could at least take some pleasure in the fact that the so-called number 2 hero was at least a little afraid of him. Only now Kirishima started realizing something was going on. Glancing back, he jolted and jumped to Izuku's side upon seeing the very large man. Endeavor. The man ignored Kirishima as his stare focused on looking down on Izuku, as far as he could tell behind the beard and mask of literal flames that covered most of the man's face. Izuku responded to the stare without yielding a millimeter, but a nagging feeling in the back of his head reminded him of Tenya's warnings. You are the quirk stealer that is manipulating my son. I'm one of the people trying to be your son's friend after you raised him to barely understand the word. You really are a number 2, and I am not talking about hero rankings. Endeavor stared at him for a moment before his eyes widened and his lips pressed against each other, holding back anger. The heat that radiated from his constant flames got a little warmer. Izuku barely stopped himself from licking his lips. This was the quirk that let such a pile of garbage be considered number 2 hero. You disrespectful. For sure, Izuku interrupted. But respect is earned. Number 2's like you haven't earned any. Midoriya, Kirishima whispered. You can't bow down in front of people like him. Remember what Todoroki told us, the other Todoroki, Izuku said, breaking his stare of the so-called hero long enough to talk to Kirishima eye to eye. He turned back towards Endeavor, continuing to talk to Kirishima. Not all villainy happens in dark alleys by people with mutations, or even most of it. Often it happens with those people you least expect it from. Bold words from a thief. You think repeating that accusation is going to achieve anything? It's something a middle school bully came up with. Izuku paused for a long moment. He should have gotten past the large man quickly to be safe, especially since Kirishima was there too. Tenya's warnings repeated in his mind. On the other hand, one of the people he hated in this world was standing right in front of him. Not that an abuser like you is in any position to complain about anyone else. Well, if he still had a chance to just keep walking, it was gone now. Endeavor's stare hardened, and the nagging feeling had turned into a real sense of danger. Izuku focused on not yielding in front of the stare. With Endeavor's size and the color of his costume, Izuku could at least imagine he was just facing a Nomu, except this one wouldn't stop if he told it to. Sometimes words can be dangerous. You might want to choose yours carefully. No, not my style. That's what Dad keeps lawyers for. Also, what words I use don't change what you have done to your family. The only thing you need to worry about my family is to stay away from it, especially Shoto. He will be the greatest hero and doesn't need to be seen with people like you. People like what? People who would like to be his friends. You brat. You know what I mean. And what would be so wrong with him having friends? Shoto doesn't need friends. The purpose of his existence is to become the strongest hero. That is what I made him for, and that is what he will do whether he likes it or not. Anything that doesn't help, that doesn't matter. Any sacrifice he needs to make, he will make, and anything that stands in the way of that? Endeavor leaned forward, bringing his facial flames even closer to Izuku and lowered his voice. Izuku held his own wrist in what seemed like an expression of hesitation and uncertainty, but the same move had pulled his sleeve back, slightly exposing most of his wristwatch, the one his dad had sent as a gift. Kirishima was standing next to Izuku, tense, and inched slowly even closer. Needs to stay away if it knows what is good for it. That sounds like a threat, but that wouldn't be very heroic. Should I take it as a threat? Izuku asked sarcastically, struggling to keep a neutral, almost bored expression. At least you aren't stupid, Endeavor responded. Shoto will be the most powerful hero, but to be number one he must also be the most popular. I don't want him to be seen with the quirk stealer unless he is defeating you. Well, it is good neither of us take orders from you then. But you should already know that for your own sons, must have been a real disappointment when your abuse didn't make them submit to your will. Too bad you didn't learn after the first one. Them? Kirishima muttered, surprised. But Izuku didn't have time to explain the discoveries of his research in peace. The burning reactor in front of them was about to blow the lid, and Izuku had broken his cooling pumps. It was pretty shocking to hear how you have treated Shoto, but I was only surprised when I started looking into things more closely. It's pretty well known that you have 3 children. Not many know there is a 4th one. There was a 4th one, until there was a fire when he was alone. I wonder what you did to drive him into that. Endeavor's flame bear flashed. Izuku squinted his eyes at the light and pure, pressuring malice from the man. In an instant Endeavor's arm rose sharply, reached instantly for Izuku's throat with a hand that had caught fire. Despite the air cannon training, Izuku wasn't moving fast enough to avoid it completely. Something yanked his shoulder, and as he got pulled backwards, a red mess of hair filled his vision. Endeavor's hand slapped Kirishima's face harmlessly as the redhead hardened in time. Endeavor withdrew his hand, looking at it for a few seconds in surprise before his stare hardened again and focused on Izuku. Kirishima didn't move from the position he had taken between them. There was no sign of hesitation even when facing the number 2 so-called hero. Izuku drew a sharp breath, but slowly his hand squeezed in a fist with flames sparking over it, and he met Endeavor's flaming stare with his ice-cold one. Kirishima, are you okay? He asked without breaking his stare. As Izuku spoke, he grabbed Kirishima's arm and tried to pull him into a safer position, but he wouldn't budge from his protective position. It was like trying to move a boulder. Yeah, that was nothing. Not sure I can handle it if he cranks up the heat though, Kirishima responded and pushed Izuku's hand away. I knew you were evil, but to attack students at their school is low even for you. You brat, don't pretend to be innocent and keep your nose away from where it doesn't belong. Afraid I'd find something you don't want the public to know, besides what I already did of course, anything that would ruin your heroic reputation? Now I am curious. Midoriya, Kirishima whispered in his best Tenya impersonation. You are walking on thin ice, kid. Things can happen to people that take that kind of risk, especially for people with such villainous quirks. You could easily get arrested for trying to steal people's quirks if you don't know how to behave. Not really, since I don't do that, unless you were suggesting you'd make false accusations. Thinking a judge would believe the number 2 hero rather than the kid with a villainous quirk? I am glad I don't need to explain your position. Make no mistake, I can make your life very unpleasant, and as far as anyone else is concerned, it would be you who is considered responsible for getting burned, and I do mean that quite literally. Endeavor stepped to the side to walk past them. Stay away from my Shoto. Piss off, Izuku responded after Endeavor passed Kirishima. The man froze mid-step, figuratively speaking of course. He needs to get away from you as soon as possible, and I am going to help. Endeavor's hands squeezed into fists. Izuku tensed to dodge faster this time, but under the anger his confidence was cracking. He might have gone too far, or his stupid mouth did. Hero or not, Endeavor was powerful enough to be considered the number 2 after All Might, and while his aura wasn't as overwhelming, it was far more malicious. Even he wouldn't get away with attacking students at school, probably, but if Izuku had pushed him to that point, Izuku and Kirishima would not stand a chance. Hey! A very familiar voice shouted, making Izuku's anger flash even surrounded by his fears. Kirishima sighed from relief. Long time since the last time I saw you. All Might was standing some distance down the corridor in his muscular hero form. He was smiling and had his hand up in greeting towards Endeavor, but something in his eyes. If it was directed at Izuku, he might not be able to fight it. The stare was backed up by the overwhelming power he had felt at USJ. I see you have met some of my students. I hope you aren't planning to chat for too long. They need to get in the ring soon. Of course, they would be your students, Endeavor sneered. I don't care about them. Just make sure they don't get in my Shoto's way. If you are referring to the tournament, I believe that is what they are expected to do. Surely you want your son to be challenged by opponents giving it their all? All might, Kirishima said. Izuku grabbed Kirishima's arm and pulled him to follow. The redhead fell quiet. We need to get to the arena, Izuku said in an emotionless tone. Oh, right. Kirishima finally started walking on his own rather than being pulled. He even stayed quiet as they walked down the stairs, and far enough to not be seen or heard by the two top heroes. Izuku drew a deep breath. Shouldn't we have told All Might what just happened? Endeavor did pretty much what I expected, maybe a little more straightforward, Izuku interrupted. And even if All Might could do something about it, I'd get burned before begging for his help. I still really don't understand why you feel like that about All Might, Kirishima said. Izuku stopped and turned to stare at him. Sorry, Kirishima said quickly. That's one of those things you don't want to talk about. Izuku sighed. Yeah, maybe, he looked down. Back there, you jumped between me and Endeavor. You must understand even you couldn't take it if he seriously decided to attack us. I guess. I wasn't really thinking about that. My body just moved before I could think. Moved before you could think, Izuku muttered. I hate that you risked it for me, but that might be the most heroic thing anyone has ever said to me. You think so? Izuku smiled softly. Yes, very manly. That got a wide smile on Kirishima's face. That said, there was still one thing Izuku had to address before he could face Kirishima in the ring. He turned to face away from Kirishima. Kirishima, back there before the whole getting attacked by Endeavor, you tried to tell me to stop, to hold me back at least. Kirishima didn't say anything, probably not sure how to respond. Do you want to be another Tenya, trying to lecture me off of doing things when you disagree with what I am doing?
No, Midoriya y.
Because if you do, you should at least use my first name. Otherwise, you sound like a teacher, and that isn't going to work. Ijiro. Oh, Kirishima gasped. Sure, if that's okay with you, me. Izuku. So you aren't angry about that? Izuku stepped back closer to Ijiro and reached an arm over his shoulders. They continued walking like that. Why would I be? I might not listen to you, especially in that kind of situation, but Izuku swallowed and blinked. It is nice to know someone cares enough to try. Ijiro gave him a blank stare for a few seconds before his lips stretched into a wide smile again. He slapped Izuku's back. Sure, Izuku bro. Izuku bro? Izuku asked.
Sorry.
You don't like it? You apologize too easily. At least it's better than what Toshi came up with. Oh, what was that? Izuku hesitated for a few seconds. Izu, also Zuku. Heh, Izu bro. Actually, that sounds better. Izuku held his face with his free hand, though there was still a smile on his face. What have I done? Zuku bro? Oh, shut up, KR. Ijiro. Okay, Ijiro said and actually kept his word. The previous fight was already over by the time they reached the ground level and stepped outside together. Chapter 44, Cracking Rock. Izuku and Ijiro stepped out to the arena together from the same corridor, despite the disagreement of the event organizers. Izuku still had his arm over Ijiro's shoulder, and they were both smirking. Our next contestants are the man of multiple tricks Izuku Midoriya and his opponent the unyielding Ijiro Kirishima. Present, Mike announced. Unyielding, Izuku muttered. That's pretty good. At least he came up with a good name for one of us. I don't know. You seem to always have some trick up your sleeve. Or a quirk. Maybe, but it doesn't sound that good. He probably didn't want to mention multiple quirks because of how people might feel about that. Izuku pointed at Ijiro with his free hand. Still, don't forget to watch out for those tricks. I'm in this to win, but you should at least make it look good. Seems they are coming to the arena together. Present Mike continued. Is that allowed? It doesn't matter to the actual fight, Aizawa responded. Though I suspect we are about to witness an impressive match. Izuku smirked in a way to taunt Ijiro. It worked. In your dreams. So, you are going for a knockout. Good to know. Try not to crack my skull in the process. Izuku smiled and shook Ijiro's shoulders slightly. I hope they can fight seriously against each other. Present Mike continued. They don't exactly look like enemies down there. And that is why they will give it their all, Aizawa said. They respect each other too much not to, and neither of them are ones to not give their all. Just joking. Don't worry about me, Izuku said, smiling. They finally arrived in front of midnight. Well, you two seem to be having good time. She held the microphone in front of the two students. Of course, Ijiro said louder than necessary with the microphone right there. I can't wait to get this match started. Izuku kept a much calmer demeanor and pointed at Ijiro with the thumb of the hand still on his shoulder. Things have to be pretty bad if this guy can't put you in a good mood. His excitement is contagious, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't excited for this fight. Midnight smiled softly and was about to say something. Make sure he didn't take the red-haired guy's quirk, someone shouted from the audience. Izuku's smile disappeared faster than if he had been punched to the face, and his arm tensed against Ijiro's shoulder. Yeah, why else would he be hanging on the Kirishima guy like that? With the last match, he was also trying to get to touch the other student. The match hasn't even started yet. Just disqualify him. Seriously? Ijiro said, still within range of the microphone. He seemed to only realize he was talking to the entire stadium after that. Izuku is a cool guy. Why do you keep attacking him when you've never met him? Sure, he could take my quirk, but why would he? That would just ruin the match for the both of us. Izuku wiped a tear off his eyes. People didn't care, though. Because he wants to win, obviously. But what would that win be worth? Ijiro responded. Don't bother, Izuku said, also still in range of the microphone. He was now holding the flood back better. They don't want to hear things that don't fit their prejudices, and it's not your burden to try to make them. Izuku slid his arm away from Ijiro and turned away. You should probably test your quirk to confirm you still have it before we start so no one can claim otherwise. There was a short pause. No, Ijiro said. I don't need to test it to know I still have it. Now it was a real struggle to hold back the flood behind Izuku's eyes. Only the stares of millions of people kept him from exposing his feelings. Ah, the purity of a young heart, Midnight swooned. But we have limited time. Are you ready to battle? Yes, Izuku said almost without sounding like he was about to cry. Oh, and Ijiro, I'm going to do everything I can to win, but I'd prefer you didn't open your mouth at the wrong time and lose that way. Don't worry. You made me train with Hitoshi for a reason, right? Right, Izuku said, and took his position opposite to Ijiro. Midnight moved between them to declare the beginning of the match. Izuku glanced at her. You might want to keep a bit more distance for this fight. Oh, don't say that, she winked suggestively, but walked further away before turning and raising her hand. Izuku crouched and tensed. Ijiro hardened his arms and punched them together before assuming his own stance. Ready? She swung her hand down. Start. Ijiro charged, a hardened arm raised for a wide swing. In a literal flash, Izuku raised his own and launched a blue hellfire arrow at a dangerously short range. Ijiro was smart enough to see it and move to dodge, but Izuku was just a little faster. The blast struck Ijiro's raised arm and exploded. The shockwave launched Ijiro to the side, but by then he was fully hardened and showed no sign of injury. At such a short distance, the shockwave might have shaken Izuku more of the two. Ijiro quickly stopped his momentum, bracing against one leg and turned to swing his other fist. Izuku leaned back and his jets flared. He launched away from Ijiro, but as usual his flight fell off balance after a few seconds. He let himself keep falling backwards and did a somersault back on his feet at a safer distance. Safe for the moment. Ijiro was already charging at him. Izuku raised both his hands and began firing blasts, focusing more on speed than the power of any individual shot. Considering how Izuku had to tense himself to make the hardening work when Ijiro let him test it, having to keep up his defense constantly against the barrage should wear out Ijiro's defenses better than any single hit. The only damage Izuku's first shots did was to Ijiro's clothes, burning away the front half of his shirt and making it appear more like his hero costume except for the backside and the surviving left sleeve that were still hanging on. Izuku made a mental note to only aim above the waistline. His second barrage, however, didn't hit even that as Ijiro ducked to the side, choosing to evade the attack which exploded against the arena wall somewhere behind. The impacts were well below the audience, but the school really needed to consider the safety of the people more. Some of their classmates were probably surprised at Ijiro's skills and the agility with which he moved, but Izuku only smiled and adjusted his aim. Despite Ijiro's dodging, Izuku got in a few more hits before he got into punching range. Izuku kept firing till the last second with no time left to dodge, so he could only pull his arms back and form his flames into shields. Ijiro's punch shook him to his core and pushed him back. The punch had enough force to push aside Izuku's arms, opening a gap in his defenses, but at least Ijiro hadn't gotten too excited to not control his strength, so Izuku's bones were still intact. Unfortunately for Ijiro, the large swings, despite their power, lacked in speed. So the follow-up strike didn't come even close to hitting, as it was Izuku's turn to duck out of the way. He continued reforming his dragon blades even thicker and smaller than their shield form until he was basically wearing burning gloves like flame brass knuckles over his fists. Ijiro had barely time to see them before Izuku's uppercut hit his chin with one of them. Izuku's experiment was a success in the sense that his fist hadn't broken. The pain was even less than when hitting non-hardened opponents. Unfortunately, the hit hadn't done much more to Ijiro. His head had moved back a tiny bit, but the biggest impact was the look of surprise in his eyes. It quickly turned into determination as he pressed his chin down against Izuku's fist despite the steam rising from his rocky skin. Izuku jumped back and pushed a few extra meters with his jets. He fired a pair of blasts before his feet even touched the floor again. This time Ijiro shielded himself with his arms, so there was even less impact, although at the cost of his remaining sleeve. Was that a new move? Ijiro asked. Yeah, I came up with it just for you. I'm still not sure how well I could cut you, but this seems safer. Cutting people's arms off isn't very manly anyway. What do you think? Ijiro opened his mouth to respond, but at the last moment remembered to stay quiet. They both waited silently for the brainwashing period to pass, Izuku with a smile on his face. It's cool. I didn't think you would come up with a whole new attack for me. Not good enough yet. Need to punch harder to crack that rock? Ijiro smirked and hardened some more before charging. Izuku reformed the flames around his fist and added some more vibration to it. It was still a new move, so he couldn't properly focus on blasting Ijiro while using it. Facing him in close combat might have been stupid, but Izuku wasn't going to pass on this chance. With Recovery Girl on standby, now was the time to really test their limits. Izuku narrowly avoided Ijiro's fist and brought his own into a hard meeting with the redhead's six-pack. It was way less efficient than punching him in the face, like trying to break in through a brick wall instead of the door, but safer to experiment on. The strike did move Ijiro back a tiny bit and made him grunt, which was already impressive. Izuku punched again faster than Ijiro, and with the element of surprise got in a quick barrage before he had to jump away to avoid being crushed under Ijiro's counterattack. I don't know what you did, Ijiro said, but I did actually feel that. He brought his hand to brush against his stomach that had a black mark where Izuku had punched him. When Ijiro brushed that away, the skin below seemed a bit red-tinted. Not just the heat, felt like you were shaking my insides. Glad to hear that. If it works on you, then there won't be many I couldn't use it on. Don't think it's going to win this match for me, though. Ijiro waited for the brainwashing window to pass and scratched his nose. Heh, don't think so. Now, how long can you keep going? You have to strain yourself constantly to keep your hardening up. You are already taking breaks of it, even when not necessary for your mobility. You aren't even fully hardened now. Ijiro didn't have time to wait for the brainwashing window to close before Izuku started blasting him again. Ijiro reacted fast enough to reinforce his hardening, but this time Izuku used as much power as he could, as fast as possible. Even if Ijiro could take it, the momentum from the first hit threw him off his feet. It left him unable to dodge the follow-up barrage of weaker shots. Izuku walked closer, blasting him repeatedly on the ground. He didn't give Ijiro the chance to get up, but listened carefully. At first, Ijiro's reaction to his bombardment was just grunts, but it soon turned higher-pitched and Ijiro gasped for air. Izuku stopped his attacks and stepped closer, massaging his hands. Ijiro was left lying in a small human-shaped crater surrounded by cracks in the concrete expanding from him. He was breathing hard, but he was breathing. Izuku got a chance to draw a deep breath as the last remnants of the hardened rocky texture disappeared from Ijiro's skin. Izuku stood over him, just beyond arm's reach. So, do you think that was enough of an ass-kicking? Izuku asked. Ijiro smiled, still breathing hard but delayed in responding. Izuku held one hand behind his back, starting to form fire around it. Ijiro's stare sharpened and his arms pushed against the floor as his entire body hardened again. Izuku's arm moved from behind his back and swung in one large punch downwards against Ijiro's stomach with every bit of strength and mass in his body. This time the punch had an actual impact as Ijiro got air punched out of his lungs, blowing it out with some spit. His already strained quirk failed, turning his skin normal. Izuku extinguished his fire but remained tense in a fighting stance until Ijiro's panting changed into laughter, occasionally broken up by gasps. He panted, can't even remember the last time a punch hurt like that. Welcome to the rest of our world, Izuku said. Midnight came to stand next to them. Kirishima, can you continue fighting? Even if I managed that, I wouldn't get up past Izuku. I think this was it. Midnight raised her arm. Ijiro Kirishima can no longer continue. The winner is Izuku Midoriya. There was very limited cheering. Izuku thought he heard some comments about Ijiro not taking him seriously, or at least his threat, seriously. As much as Izuku would have liked to correct them, there was a more important person to worry about. He reached his hand to Ijiro who, after a few more seconds of panting, grabbed it and let Izuku help pull him up. They both glanced at the hole Ijiro left behind. The redhead waved his hand to Cementos. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to make more work for you. The pro hero nodded. Ijiro reached behind his back for the last remnants of his shirt that was still somehow hanging from his neck like a cape. He ripped through the last surviving strands around his neck to take off the remaining fabric and wiped sweat off his face with it while they walked away from the arena. You really go through those quickly, Izuku elbowed Ijiro's exposed side. Well, yes. I was afraid something like this might happen. I used to tear up a lot of clothes when I was younger before I learned to control my quirk better. Getting blasted into the arena probably didn't help either. Heh, that was actually amazing. I still can't believe you managed to punch through my quirk. Hitting it with an artillery barrage first might have been the bigger thing. Still, did you really come up with that new technique just for me? I wouldn't say just, but punching your face was definitely the inspiration for it, thanks. Heh, anytime. So, what did you think about my fighting? A big improvement from what I thought in the beginning of the semester. I was actually having a hard time hitting you. If I didn't have my jets, things could have gone very differently. You were weak, relatively speaking, to long-distance attacks, but that only works for as long as I could keep that distance, and you can move pretty fast when you want to. A speed quirk might make you almost unbeatable. They stepped into the corridor. Oh, you were still serious about that? I made a promise, didn't I? So manly. Oh, right. Ijiro raised his hand and held it up between them. I guess I made a promise too. You don't have to if Izuku started, but Ijiro shook his head. A promise is a promise. A few drops of water from the previous flood leaked from under the floodgates behind Izuku's eyes. If only he could be as trustworthy as those who trusted him. Shouldn't you at least hold on to it until your fight for the third place? Oh, right. I forgot about that. Ijiro put his hand down. Izuku shook his head and took the chance to discreetly wipe his eyes on his sleeve. You think it's going to be against Todoroki, or that? Hananuki, Izuku said the name. Yeah, I bet Todoroki is going to beat him, so I have to figure out some way to deal with that crazy quirk that melted the arena. Izuku brushed his chin and looked down deep in thought. I wouldn't be so sure. Do you mean I can't beat him, or? I'm not sure Todoroki can beat him. Not the way he is using his quirk and chaining it to his father. He might be the audience favorite, but unless he manages to overcome Endeavor, or at least his crappy training, he isn't going to win this tournament. Izuku raised his head to face Todoroki, who was coming to the arena for his fight. They both stopped to stare at each other, neither willing to break the contact, but also not planning to be the first one to talk until Todoroki finally spoke. You should mind your own business. He walked past Izuku and Ijiro. Izuku glanced back. You are doing exactly what your father wants, you know? We had the displeasure of meeting him earlier. That stopped Todoroki. He wants you to stay away from us to focus on becoming what he wants you to be, and to not stain his dear shiny reputation with having a family member around someone like me. Izuku turned forward and continued walking. I won't try to tell you how to fight again, but you should at least understand what you are doing. You don't have to take my complaining, but if you keep pushing everyone away, you are only making his job easier. Still, do whatever you want to do, but just, he paused, don't become like him. Todoroki didn't respond to that. After a few seconds, Ijiro caught up to Izuku. Do you think it is good to talk to him like that? Izuku started. I don't know. I'm just telling him how I feel. It's not like I am some kind of expert on, well, people. Really, you think that? Izuku glanced at Ijiro with a question in his eyes. I mean, you are always training and helping us with whatever trouble we have. You even helped me see my quirk has more potential than I thought. I don't know how to help Todoroki, but if any one of us can figure out how to do that, I think it's going to be you. Oh. Izuku couldn't say anything more. Ijiro smiled. It was the kind of wide smile that was contagious, and Izuku felt his lips twitch before Ijiro even spoke. I guess I wasn't the only one underestimating what I could do. Izuku shook his head, trying to keep a straight face, but man was it difficult with Ijiro around. By the time they got back to their seats, he had already failed. Excellent fight, you two, Tenya declared. Izuku, did you use some new technique? Yeah. How did you punch Kirishima without breaking your hand? Kaminari shouted. I'd need to see Recovery Girl if I even tried to do that. Izuku held up his fist and encased it in blue flames, so intense it looked more like a wavy blue burning liquid than a regular flame. Not sure what to call it yet, but it works. Sure does, Ijiro said, and rubbed the spot on his stomach where Izuku had punched him. His skin still had a fist-sized red mark. You got to use that in training tomorrow. Oh, don't worry. I will.
Chapter 45. Melton Ego.
Okay, everyone. Present Mike announced. We've got 3 more matches to go. The next one is between Juzo Hananuki from Class 1B. He's facing up against Shoto Todoroki from Class 1A. Both were admitted to UA with recommendations and have shown strong performance today, though with some side effects. Will the arena turn into a puddle or the Arctic Sea? Either way, Cementos is going to have work to do when this fight is over. They both have powers with far-reaching effects, Aizawa commented, but both also need to improve the technique and control with which they utilize that power. Izuku couldn't have put it better himself. Well, maybe, but he would have been ruder. With any luck, Todoroki would pay more attention to their teacher. Izuku glanced to the side at a glowing spot in one of the VIP sections of the audience that was the older Todoroki. He was probably scoffing at the suggestion that his son wasn't a perfect hero already. He would see his error eventually. He might not accept it, but he would see. So are you excited to be in the semifinals? Midnight asked the 2 students. Should I be? Todoroki asked back in a quiet voice. His lack of emotion alone was enough to answer the question. Is it somehow different from my earlier fights? Well, you are closer to the finale than any time before. Isn't that what happens when the tournament goes on? Weaker opponents drop out, and the rest get closer to the finale. I'll have time to be excited after I win the finale. Well, aren't you confident? How about you, Hananuki? Seems you have recovered from the hit in your last match. Yes, we have an excellent school nurse, but she is also humble, unlike my opponent. He seems to forget he isn't the only one aiming to win. I can see that, Midnight agreed. Izuku poked Ijiro's side with his elbow. Are you sure you don't need to see Recovery Girl? You'll still have to be in shape for the last fight. Nah, I just need to rest a bit and relax my body so I can use my quirk properly again. You didn't hit me that hard. I'll have to remember that for next time. This is going to be an exciting match, Midnight declared, so let's get it started. She quickly ran away from the 2, further back than with other battles. Ready? Start. Todoroki immediately launched one of his giant ice attacks. Izuku pressed his lips together to make sure he wouldn't drool. Ice caught up to Hananuki in seconds, and he disappeared behind the glacier. Izuku sighed. At least the iceberg wasn't as excessively large as with Todoroki's first fight. The entire arena fell quiet. Is it over already? Kaminari asked. Izuku opened his mouth to answer it in a way that would have highlighted the stupidity of the question. Tenya, having experienced Hananuki firsthand, reacted faster.
No.
He can't win this by trapping his opponent. As he spoke, one side of the glacier began drooping and falling like it was melting. Hananuki slid out of the ice just before the whole thing collapsed into an arena-wide puddle. Todoroki moved his right leg, probably to launch another attack despite the failure of the first one. His foot got stuck as the spread-out ice re-solidified around his leg. He glanced down and kept staring for several seconds, a very long time in the middle of a fight. Izuku shook his head. He seems confused, Ijiro commented. He isn't used to setbacks. A strong quirk and rich dad can do that, or well, in combination with other things anyway. Hey, that's right, he's a lot like you. Izuku frowned.
No.
His father might be considered a villain, but at least he wasn't scum like Endeavor. While Todoroki was dealing with the confusion of not winning instantly and started melting the ice, technically using his fire side, Izuku noted something was happening to the arena barely visible through the now relatively thin layer of ice. It reached Todoroki by the time he released himself from the ice. An ice pillar burst from below Todoroki's feet, launching him upwards. The bottom of that pillar began immediately liquefying, but it gave him enough momentum to get away for the moment. Izuku leaned over the railing in an attempt to see better. This might be good. Ijiro responded. Hananuki's quirk is a perfect counter to Todoroki's ice, at least the way he uses it. It might force him to reconsider how he treats his quirk, like how sparring without quirks has made you change your fighting style to not just take every hit head-on. Oh, you're right. Probably, Tenya added, though it most likely won't be enough to make him use his fire. Izuku couldn't deny that. He shrugged. Todoroki landed outside the liquefied area, but had to repeat the same move as that area spread out. He walked backwards to keep his distance and glanced back towards the nearest edge of the arena. He's getting pushed to the edge like I was, Tenya said. Seems so, Izuku said. The question is, did he learn from your mistake? Todoroki put his foot down, literally, and launched another mass-scale ice attack. Though this time the large ice mass appeared closer to him and moved rapidly like a giant horizontal pillar or a piston. Izuku tilted his head. It was a little better than before, but still essentially a make more ice until the problem goes away type of solution. The ice covered Hananuki from sight as it pushed him, but as it reached over the edge of the arena he was still nowhere to be seen. Todoroki had failed to push him out at least, and now Hananuki was out of his line of visibility entirely. I wonder how long he can hold his breath, Ijiro said, staring at the still liquid arena under the ice pillar. The quirk was now impacting most of the arena, though the floor Todoroki was standing on was still solid. Izuku started getting increasingly excited about this quirk. Too bad a hero student would be unlikely to sell his. Izuku had to be satisfied by taking notes. While doing that, he almost missed a glint in the ice behind Todoroki. A small puddle appeared barely a meter from him. A hand shot out of the puddle and grabbed his feet as Hananuki emerged. A few seconds later, they were both covered in an iceberg, because that had worked so well before. It was probably just an instinctual reaction from Todoroki, and the only thing he knew to do. The stadium was completely silent for a long time, as the glacier just stood there with no sign of either student. Shouldn't they be getting out of that thing soon? Present Mike voiced his concern. Are we sure they're okay? Both of them have the ability to get out of that ice, but only as long as they are conscious, Aizawa said. Both Midnight and Cementos had stepped to the edge of the ice and seemed to talk to each other. The side of the glacier near them began to droop. Hananuki slid out on the arena and was left lying on his back. He gasped for air so hard it was obviously visible even from a distance. Midnight leaned next to him. Hananuki is out again and seems to be okay, Present Mike announced. But where is Todoroki? He had barely finished speaking when the whole iceberg began steaming. Izuku stepped back from the railing and put his notebook away. A few rising strands of steam soon turned into a giant hot cloud that filled the entire stadium. It was almost like they were in a steam sauna. Izuku would known. He had one of those in his house. Was that? Present Mike spoke. Yes, Aizawa responded. I think we can say Todoroki is safe too. Izuku wiped his face on his sleeve to clean the signs of his salivation. The power output needed to evaporate such massive ice was phenomenal, a whole buffet in itself. Thankfully, the steam cloud covered everything for several minutes. Wow, Ijiro said. I think with power like this Todoroki won after all. Don't think so, Izuku said after managing to swallow the remaining saliva from his mouth. There are no sounds of battle. Either Hananuki got pushed out of bounds by the steam, or there is something going on we can't see. Too bad you don't have a quirk to see through this. True, have to remember to get one. Heh, that isn't even surprising anymore. Finally, the steam started evaporating, first enough to see people around them, then nearby sections of the audience. Slowly, the 4 forms of people on the arena became visible. 3 were standing up and walking towards the 4th, which was still and seemed a lot smaller than the others. It was Todoroki. He was half-sunken in the now completely solid arena floor. The floor around his left arm was deformed and smoking, and his shirt on that side was just gone. No way. He got Todoroki. Zero shouted. Man, that's impressive, Kaminari added. In the arena, Hananuki stood in front of Todoroki, who suddenly turned to look up at his trapper. The amount of smoke rising from his left arm increased. Shoto dash. A scream echoed across the arena. The light that was Endeavor was burning brighter as he screamed. Don't you dare to lose. The smoke around Todoroki disappeared and his head dropped. Midnight kneeled next to him. Izuku frowned. Damn Endeavor. Midnight got back up and raised her hand. Shoto Todoroki can no longer move or fight. The winner is Juzo Hananuki from Class 1B. Endeavor's fires across the stadium were even brighter, causing people to run away from him. Izuku focused his stare on Todoroki, who was waiting chin down for Hananuki or Cementos to release him from his concrete prison. Despite the figurative chains around Todoroki, it was the first time Izuku had even heard of him failing or losing at something, and he now looked like it too. We are going to have a short break before the final 2 matches, Aizawa announced. Izuku glanced at Endeavor and turned around. He tapped Ijiro's shoulder. I need to go do something. Do your best if I won't get back in time. At least try to not catch a cold. Heh, sure, Ijiro responded. Is this about Todoroki or Endeavor? Tenya turned to face Izuku. I'm not going to look for him if that's what you are wondering, but there is something else that might be worth doing. He left his class looking for the stairs up, walking past Tokoyami, who was again standing in the shadows of the entrance with Dark Shadow. It took some time to handle his business upstairs, and the bronze match started just before he got back. As he entered his class's section, the first thing he saw was an ice pillar rising from the arena. He shook his head, then rubbed his forehead. He realized the match hadn't yet been announced over and glanced down. Ijiro was still moving, running away from the pillar. A piece of ice seemed to be missing from the outer edge of the ice. The attack might have been just a little too big to fully evade, but sometimes problems could be punched away if you were strong enough. Using the pillar itself as a cover, Ijiro had managed to cover a good chunk of the distance between himself and Todoroki. Another reason for Todoroki to not make them so large carelessly. Then again, even with a large one, he didn't get a direct hit, so he launched another large ice mass at Ijiro, who dove out of the way, hardening his legs to get the strength boost from his quirk and extend his jump. Izuku smiled. People actually thought hardening was bad for Ijiro's mobility, failing to understand that the strength to punch through concrete walls could be applied to more than that. Despite the shorter distance, he managed to dodge the attack completely, thought the iceberg was also smaller than before. Was Todoroki trying to fix his technique, or was he reaching his limits? He had just made some pretty big glaciers in the previous match. The end result of the fight wasn't as set in stone yet as someone might have thought. Ijiro charged forward again. He didn't really have any other options. Maybe a long-range quirk would help him more than one that more closely worked with his hardening. Izuku brushed his chin. Todoroki launched another attack, but this one didn't go for Ijiro. Instead, the ice formed a long wall that started from Todoroki and reached past Ijiro to deny any evasive movements in that direction. It was even thick enough that it would take Ijiro at least several punches to break through. He seemed to realize that and moved sideways to get some distance from the wall, but a few seconds later Todoroki created another wall, trapping Ijiro between them much like he had done in the cavalry battle. Though this time he seemed to be slower in creating the second wall, it didn't change the end result. All Ijiro could do was to run at Todoroki faster, but when the third attack came straight through the middle, it spread across the entire space left between those walls. The only way for Ijiro was up, but even though his jump was impressive, the ice launched upwards and caught his feet. Ijiro broke some of the ice away with a punch, but new ice simply grew over his arm until he couldn't move enough to break it even fully hardened. Only his head was left outside the ice. Even with his flaws, he is still strong, Izuku said about Todoroki. Certainly, Tenya responded and turned to look at Izuku. Shouldn't you be getting ready for your match? Yeah, just wanted to see this one to the end. Izuku turned back to the corridor and headed to the arena. It had been a long day, but there was only one more fight to go. He didn't want to underestimate his opponent, but couldn't help but start worrying about why he was here in the first place. He walked with a thoughtful frown on his face until he stumbled on the stairs. He blinked a couple of times, half hanging from the railing. After drawing a deep breath, he kept walking and rubbed his forehead. The frown was about to come back when he stopped at a platform between floors and his lips stretched into a wide smile. Hey, Toshi. He greeted his favorite sleep-deprived brainwasher. Are you feeling better? I've been feeling better since you left, but Recovery Girl wouldn't believe me, Hitoshi said, glancing at the short, elderly woman next to him. I have been a nurse in this school for longer than you two have been alive. Can you imagine how many students have claimed they have felt fine when they were everything but, especially students from the hero course? Then, why did you let to?
Itoshi come?
Shouldn't you be keeping an eye on him at your reception? I should, but I also should have some peace and quiet to do my work and watch the tournament. Recovery Girl pointed at Hitoshi with her cane. Have you ever tried to tell him no? Izuku smiled. Did you make the mistake of trying to debate him? Recovery Girl huffed and shook her head, telling Izuku more than any verbal answer could. At least you weren't lying with your sales pitch, she eventually responded. Though I can't complain about getting to view at least the final match directly. I can always monitor him up there since other students' injuries were better within my ability to treat without long monitoring. At least people that get this far are generally sturdy. What if you get other patients? Ijiro just got frozen in an iceberg, and I wasn't exactly gentle with him before. And where am I most likely to find him now that he should be coming to see me? Oh, that makes sense, Izuku realized. As I told you, I have a lot of experience with how you hero students tend to behave, and your friend didn't hesitate to exploit that. She glanced at Hitoshi again. I just pointed out the obvious, Hitoshi shrugged. By the way, great speech. You liked it? I felt like a used car. Used car that's going to have plenty of internship opportunities, hopefully. If not, it is not because of your pitch. I especially like the part about walking to Tartaros. Letting Monoma copy my quirk was also genius. Too bad you didn't catch Ijiro with it too. Hey, Ijiro needed a chance to show what he can do too. Also, you're the one who taught him to watch his words while fighting. I guess I did. Wait, what did you call him? Ijiro. It was Hitoshi's turn to smile. I see. So we are up to 3 now. Finally. Was it so hard? Yes, Izuku said and turned his head to face away, but he made it easier. That much has been obvious since the beginning. We should have made you fight in front of people sooner. It wasn't that. We can talk about it later, but there is more to worry about than the finale. Oh. Hitoshi didn't have time to say anything more as Izuku grabbed his shoulder. Still glad to see you up. For now, he still needs to be monitored, Recovery Girl said. Not alone overnight? Izuku said and smirked. No problem. Shouldn't you already be out there beating that Hananuki guy? I was just going there. Any suggestions how to beat him? You're asking me? Hitoshi said. I might be biased, but be careful with the head. Yes, please, Recovery Girl agreed. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, looking down unusually meekly. Yeah, sorry. Recovery Girl sighed and kept walking past Izuku. Maybe there is still hope for you. Go show it in practice. No reason to make this tournament any longer than it already is. Wish me luck, Izuku said as he passed Hitoshi. As if you'd need that. Seems a bit overkill, actually. Izuku was smiling a lot more for the rest of the walk down. He reached the corridor on the ground floor without frowning, maybe a few blinks and rubbing his forehead for a moment, but not frowning. Then he ran into Ijiro and Todoroki. The redhead was holding his arms with his hands still shivering a bit, but with a grin on his face. Todoroki was walking eyes down, an empty expression on his face. If anything, he seemed tense. If Izuku hadn't seen their match, he would have been mistaken on who was the actual winner. "You don't seem to mind losing again," he told Ijiro with a smirk. "With a fight like that, no way. I just wish I'd gotten closer and seen how well Todoroki fights in close combat. Never seen anyone really get to do that with him." Izuku wanted to say something about what that might mean for Todoroki's skills in such a situation, but in an unusual expression of self-control, he kept his mouth shut. Instead, he lit his dragon blade and held it as a shield in front of Ijiro, who let go of his arms and held his hands in front of the flames like he was sitting by a bonfire. "Thanks. So, you want my quirk now?" Todoroki's head finally perked up. "That's up to you," Izuku responded. "You don't need to. But do you want another chance to show it off to people?" "Oh right, that too.
Helieido.
If you can do that. Not sure how much it helps against that Hananuki guy." "Okay," Izuku said, shut off his dragon blade and held his hand between them like wanting to shake Ijiro's hand. Ijiro accepted the gesture and grabbed his hand, firmly. Rather than a regular handshake, he pulled Izuku closer until their forearms met. Despite the firm grip, his arm was still shaking. "You should get checked by recovery girl after getting frozen like that." "Nah, I'll be fine, and wouldn't want to miss the finale." "You don't have to. She's waiting for you with our class." Both her and Toshi figured what you would do. "Heh, that's Hitoshi for you. Shame he missed." I mean, maybe you should give him my quirk next time you want to spar. You could hit at full power even if it's just training." Izuku stared at Ijiro for a moment, then brushed his. "That might not be the worst idea. Also, we can't have each other's quirk most of the time, but practicing with different quirks has taught me a lot, and it would help us understand what each other can do. Remind me about this tomorrow." As he spoke, his hand went from his chin to his forehead. He drew a long, slightly shaky breath. "Will do. Are you okay? You don't look that good." Izuku blinked a couple of times to clear his vision. "Yeah, don't worry. My body just needs to adjust to taking in more quirks." "Oh, because you also got both from Hitoshi. I didn't think of that. Sorry, I shouldn't have pushed mine on you too." "That's okay. It's like adding weights at the gym. Lifting gets harder, but it is the only way to get stronger." "Oh, didn't think about it like that. Well, you can always borrow my weights if you need to train." Izuku chuckled and tested the quirk by hardening his body. Surprisingly, he also felt better as he did that. His head still felt dizzy, but breathing was easier. Izuku sighed in relief and looked down the corridor, past Todoroki, who was staring at him, and Ijiro, with more determination now set in his eyes, thinking of his upcoming final match. "I hope you don't have plans for the evening victory party at my place, both of you." Ijiro gave him a thumbs up. Todoroki just looked at him with an emotionless stare. Chapter 46. The Final Fight. Izuku released the hardening before stepping out to the arena. It left him feeling worse without it, but there was no need to expose the ace up his sleeve unnecessarily. He wondered if the quirk could have other positive effects on the body besides the obvious defensive value and enhanced strength. He joined Hananuki and Midnight at the center of the arena. "Well, aren't you looking in high spirits, Midoriya?" Midnight said. "Excited for the finale?" "No," Izuku said, and tilted his head to massage his stiff neck. "Just ran into some friends on the way. Invited them to a victory party at my house." Hananuki frowned at Izuku's nonchalant attitude. "Confident much?" "Actually, yes, although you did beat Todoroki, so I should probably be careful. Mostly I just have other things on my mind." "Like?" "Not your business." Izuku slipped from the serious expression with a quick inhale and held the side of his forehead for a moment. "Are you feeling okay, Midoriya?" Midnight asked. "Yes, don't worry about me." Izuku stretched his arms above his head, trying to show he was ready for the fight despite blinking a few times to clear his vision. "Are we going to start this show? You should at least take this seriously." Izuku brought his arms down and stared at Hananuki. "It is a show to entertain people, and do our best to show off for heroes that are recruiting. That's the whole point of this festival. Doesn't mean I wouldn't take this fight seriously, just not for my own sake. Interesting, Midnight said in her constant flirtatious style. You have goals besides winning the tournament? The point of winning is to look good to people watching, and a lot of them have already decided to hate me before they knew anything about me besides the basics of my quirk. I prefer to worry about people that actually give me a reason to care about what they think. That, Hananuki said. I don't have anything to say about that, except people can be nasty that way. I apologize for what I said. Izuku smiled and offered his hand for a handshake. No hard feelings, then? Hananuki raised his hand but hesitated. Don't do it, someone shouted from the audience and got a scowl from Midnight. The match hasn't started yet. I couldn't do anything to you without getting disqualified if I wanted to. True, Hananuki admitted and took Izuku's hand. Then each of them took their starting position with Midnight to the side. She raised her arm. Begin. Hananuki immediately crouched to bring his hands in contact with the floor for his quirk, but at the same time, Izuku's jets flared. He took several running steps, and then his feet left the ground. The distance between them disappeared before Hananuki had time to even activate his quirk. He barely dodged Izuku's kick. It was an impressive show of reaction speed on his part, although he only had time to do so because Izuku aimed for his side rather than the head as was his first instinct. Still impressive, especially considering Izuku had moved so fast he himself had barely reacted fast enough to do the kick. He landed behind Hananuki a bit further than intended and took a fraction of a second too long to regain his balance, but by then he was already turning around and charged back at Hananuki the instant his feet touched the floor, this time without using his jets. The one mistake both Tenya and Todoroki had made was to keep too much distance for too long. Hananuki, however, continued reacting fast. He was already back up and raised his arms to block Izuku's punch, turning a little to guide the attack aside. Then Hananuki started falling backwards. His hand approached the floor again. His leg left the floor and swung up in an arch ending at Izuku's head. It was far from impossible for Izuku to dodge, but what benefit would that have had for him? The kick connected with a loud thud, yelp and a hiss as Hananuki's foot met the rocky surface of Izuku's hardened skin. His head barely turned from the hit. It was so painless Izuku had a chance to analyze the experience. If he had chosen to do so, he could have braced himself and remained totally motionless from the hit, though that would have been bad news for Hananuki's foot. He really liked this quirk. He was so happy to have gotten a taste of it and had a wide grin on his stony face, at least until the booing started. Well, mostly booing. So you did steal Kirishima's quirk after all, Hananuki said, hanging on the opposite edge of a small puddle of the arena, nursing his foot bent against his torso. Was that whole friend's act just for show? Why does everyone always assume I'm stealing? Izuku muttered and raised his hand to point at where his class sat, where the loudest voice in the arena had come from. Oh yeah. Ijiro cheered, arms up, standing 1 foot against the railing despite Tenya waving his arm next to him. Midnight stepped a bit closer and had enough understanding to hold her microphone in front of Izuku. Does he look, or sound, like someone that has been stolen from? Hananuki didn't respond. He wouldn't be that easy to brainwash. No, I let him borrow my quirk. He didn't even ask until I got the idea. Izuku raised his head to look at Ijiro, while still keeping his mouth close to the microphone. Ijiro, I could hear that. Are you sure you don't have a voice quirk too? Yeah, came the response, only slightly quieter than before, more audible as the rest of the audience had forgotten to boo while listening to the interaction. Izuku finally returned his full attention to Hananuki. I want people to see what he could do with his quirk, in case it isn't clear to everyone already. If you get out of your pool, I'll let you attack me 3 times without fighting back. Izuku strained his whole body, turning it entirely into its hardened state. Despite the strain, he was feeling so much better that way. Hananuki remained quiet for a long moment and began expanding the melted pool behind himself to get further away. You think I am stupid enough to expose myself for pointless attacks? Izuku crouched and leaped using his jets for extra distance. He landed on Hananuki's side of the puddle right by the edge, reached down with a hardened arm before Hananuki could swim away, and lifted him up with a single arm. Izuku moved his arm up and down, testing his strength in this state, satisfied and excited at how light his opponent felt. Hananuki wasn't about to go down without a fight, though, and swung his fist to punch Izuku between the eyes. It ended about as you'd expect. There might have been a little crack, but it didn't come from Izuku. He swung his arm and threw Hananuki several meters away. He tried to step to go after him, but one of his feet wouldn't come up. Glancing down, it had been partially sunken into the floor that had re-solidified around the foot. Izuku had to move quickly, and he crouched to punch the floor as hard as he could. The solid concrete around his feet exploded and shattered like the boulder on his yard had. Izuku still had a wide grin on his face as he pulled his foot free and kicked the floor just to see a piece of concrete break and fly off from the kick. He was getting giddy at experimenting on a new quirk like a kid that had just manifested his, but hadn't yet had their parents notice. A moving shadow was the first warning of Hananuki's approach. Izuku raised his arms in defense, but Hananuki didn't go for a punch or even kick. Instead, he dove to the ground below Izuku's defenses like he was going for a super low tackle. It was surprising, and for most people, seemed to be a stupid move, as Izuku was just a second away from stomping him into the arena, hopefully with not too much force. Unfortunately for Izuku, he wasn't fighting most people, and the foot still on the ground sunk into the ground that began rapidly turning into liquid as soon as Hananuki touched the floor. They both sunk in as the fight suddenly turned into a mix of swimming and wrestling. This was Hananuki's domain. Hardening wasn't helping Izuku, and he had to focus on keeping his head above the surface and keeping Hananuki close, while Hananuki tried to pull him down and get him trapped. Ever considerate, Izuku twisted to turn his back away from Hananuki before activating his jets. Liquid concrete splashed around them as Hananuki tried to keep him down, but that ended when Izuku introduced him to the sole of his shoe. With a burst of the arena, Izuku launched straight up in the air. If only things had been that well. It only took seconds for his flight path to start shifting towards more erratic. The way he was going, he'd be lucky if he crashed inside the arena instead of outside of it. At least that way the landing would be softer, as Hananuki had finally gotten to start the process of turning the arena into a swimming pool. Well, I guess this is as good a chance as any to do this, Izuku muttered. Even if it hurts. He boosted his jets, trying to gain as much altitude as possible, then reached deep inside and opened the cage in which he had stashed his second most recent quirk loan. As soon as he did, he bit his teeth together from pain as his entire head felt like it was on fire and being crushed at the same time. He couldn't even keep his eyes open as the skull and skin around them changed. If his flight had had any stability left, it disappeared as he entered a death spiral towards the floor. He tried to twist and change his position, but it was already difficult enough to do at the best of times. Suddenly, he jolted upwards and came to a relative stop as his body was pressed against a large, soft mass. Finally. I don't know how you did that, but I don't want to do it again. Heh, Izuku chuckled. He was having difficulty talking now. He felt his new beak with his fingers. The teeth he had bit together were no longer there. The audience had fallen silent again. But really, did they have any reason to be surprised anymore? Dark shadow had emerged from Izuku's gut and spread his wings to balance their flight. As Izuku restarted his jets, they zoomed over the arena like a plane. You better not. I didn't want to do this in the first place, the quirk complained. It's why you idea. I only did it because of Fumi. You need to show these people I am a good quirk. Izuku chuckled. Oka. He leaned back, bringing them to a hover. Dark shadow pressed and even melded against his body, spreading his wings even further, making them look like some dark angel hovering over the arena. Izuku pulled his hands up and leaned his elbows against Dark Shadow to support his head over the quirk, acting quite relaxed. Yuahe heeded this. Why haven't you done this with Tokoyami? I wish we could fly together, but he doesn't have such a jet quirk, just me. He was quiet for some time. You have been talking about giving people quirks. Could you? I mean, I wouldn't be opposed if he had something like those jets, if they feel good for him, of course. Izuku would have laughed, but the sound that came out of his beak was barely recognizable as one. You don't need know her quike. I already stopped ushing my jet quick. You ahe the one keeping us up. Dark Shadow twisted to see Izuku's back and how the jets weren't doing anything anymore. Izuku was just laying on Dark Shadow, and they kept hovering over the mostly liquid arena. I'm flying, Dark Shadow said. We are flying. I can help Fumi fly. Seems show. I can fly with Fumi. Dark Shadow shouted and moved around excited, so much Izuku had to grab the quirk and hold on. Calm down. The fight is not over yet. So, Present Mick's voice echoed across the stadium. What now? Now, Aizawa responded. Now Midoriya has taken a possibly insurmountable advantage over his opponent. It doesn't seem like Hananuki can reach him up there, and we have already seen in previous matches that the opposite isn't true. Even though he couldn't see Aizawa, Izuku could tell he was rubbing his forehead about to get a headache over his problem child. Speaking of which, Izuku's throat was squeezing, and he had to breathe shallowly for a moment. "Wa out," he told Dark Shadow, and pointed his hand down where Hananuki was still floating in the now mostly liquefied arena. The dragon blade flashed over his hand and launched a blue hellfire arrow. Izuku wasn't aiming directly at Hananuki. His opponent wasn't Ijiro, and killing him would have been counterproductive. The blast hit the liquid concrete several meters from Hananuki and exploded with enough force that some of the liquid concrete got launched into the air and well out of bounds of the arena. Hananuki got pushed back by the waves generated and landed with a splat. His head turned enough to keep his face over the surface as one of his hands clawed at the liquid concrete. "AI!" Dark Shadow screamed, and they lost several meters of altitude before Izuku used his jets to slow them down until Dark Shadow got back control. "Sohi," Izuku said. "Let's land on the edge." Dark Shadow carried him down to a thin edge of arena within bounds of the match that was still solid. As soon as Izuku's feet touched the floor, he pointed at Hananuki. "If you want to show you Ahegi quick, go defeat him and dag him up." "Okay," the sentient quirk responded excitedly and stretched away from Izuku towards their opponent. Izuku made it a point to turn away. "Hey, what? Let go of Mebulm," Hananuki shouted. As his voice was mumbled under gurgles, there were splashes, and soon after wordless yelps. Izuku strolled casually along the edge of the arena. If he still had lips, he might have whistled just to make the point better, but instead he was more focused on feeling his facial changes. His mouth and nose had turned into a bird's beak like Tokoyami's, but as he yanked off one of the feathers covering his head, it wasn't quite as dark as Tokoyami's feathers or Dark Shadow. Izuku's were gray, and light gray at that, closer to his normal hair color than Tokoyami's feathers. He remained focused on it until a large shadow rose over him, Dark Shadow carrying a gasping Hananuki from one leg. "Go, poof him out of bounds. Gently. He might be hurt." "Okay." Dark Shadow dragged Hananuki past Izuku and lowered him over the edge of the arena. "Hananuki is out of bounds," Midnight declared. "The winner of this match, tournament, and first year's sport festival is Izuku Midoriya." "And Dark Shadow," Izuku added. "Yes, of course," Midnight said. "And Dark Shadow, the quirk?" "Thanks," Dark Shadow whispered to Izuku, who held his fist up, and they fist bumped. Or at least Dark Shadow made his closest equivalent to a fist. Then Izuku jumped off the arena and kneeled next to Hananuki, who was still conscious, but breathing fast and superficially. He jolted when Izuku pressed his chest with his hand. "Maybe that will lit the too much," Izuku muttered, then spoke louder as Hananuki tried to push himself up. "Don't move. That shockwave did a number on you. Rikuffy Gil need to check on you." Hananuki couched. "Aren't you going to celebrate your victory?" Izuku's eyes hardened. "Celeb hate?" While Shomion is laying on the ground with unclean Injuhi's body able to breathe. Only a scum would do something like that. Izuku turned to look away and towards the area of the audience where he knew most of the teachers to be, including All Might. "Oh, something woes than that." "Like what?" "Nothing." Izuku shook his head, then regretted it as the world began spinning.
"Sorry."
He turned away and managed a few shaky steps before he leaned forward and vomited his lunch out while Yue's robots came to pick up Hananuki. One of them came to Izuku and tried to grab Izuku's arm, but despite barely remaining standing, Izuku pulled his arm back. "I don't need you help. Are you sure?" Dark Shadow asked as the robot held back. "Yes, you I just a heavy quike to have." "Are you calling me fat?" Izuku laughed once, then gagged. barely holding back another hurl of vomit. No, but you ahes thong and complex. It is hada for my body to adapt to you. Oh, so I'm so strong it makes you sick. Sort of. Remember that if you ever want to take me again.
Słuchaj.
What have you gone and done now? Recovery Girl said with annoyed sharpness in her voice. She stopped the robots from taking Hananuki with a gesture as she stepped out of the corridor. After feeling his chest with her fingers, looking at his eyes and giving him a short kiss with her healing quirk, she let the robots then take him away and walked to Izuku with Hitoshi, Ijiro, and Tokoyami coming after her, though the last one was unrecognizable for most present. He had a sharp chin, regular but quite pale skin, thin lips, large sharp nose, large eyes, and spiky raven black hair that would have not been out of place on an anime protagonist. Most importantly, there were no feathers or beak anywhere on his head. Fumi. Dark Shadow stretched out to Tokoyami. Did you see us? I could fly. We could fly. He wasn't even using his jets. We could fly. Fumikage smiled. He could be surprisingly expressive even in his normal look, but this was the first time in all his life he could smile just the same as almost everyone else around him. He hugged the dark quirk as Recovery Girl kept walking to Izuku with the others. Midnight got there first, though. Midoriya, you really don't look right. Are you sure you didn't suffer any injuries during the fights?
No.
Izuku had to pause to gag and spit some more slime and vomit. He was leaning on the edge of the arena as he did. I don't think you need to worry about him, Hitoshi interrupted. He just forgot to follow his own advice. Oh, what advice was that? Midnight asked, holding out her microphone. He warned us to not eat too much right before the tournament, then he went all in on the quirk buffet. That caused a lot of murmur from the audience. Izuku was mostly trying to help us get visibility for our quirks, but that just made him overdo it. He can get overly selfless sometimes and forgets his own good, at least for people that he likes enough. He didn't need my quirks to beat Minoma, but it let you see what they could do better than our fight did. Heh, I just had the idea to bet my quirk on our fight, Ijiro added. Glad to see he got to use it. I hope that guy's hand is okay. I didn't like to leave Fumi, but Midoriya wouldn't be alive anymore if he had stolen me, Dark Shadow said, just as the audience murmurs were getting louder. I should have realized you were going to do something like this, Recovery Girl muttered. What made you think it would be okay to take, what, 3, no, for extra quirks into your body all at once? Izuku didn't respond anything to that. Recovery Girl sighed. For Shinso's quirks you should hold on to them till the morning while he recovers, the other two. No problem. Izuku pushed himself away from the arena and stopped in front of Tokoyami. I hope you didn't get ushed to the new face. I sent a picture to my parents and didn't explain anything to them. He smiled again, taking the last chance to do so as Izuku placed his hand on Tokoyami's head. Don't bite you tongue. The transfer and the transformation were no more pleasant than the previous times, and Hitoshi moved in closer, ready in case either of them collapsed during the process, but slowly the pain began losing its heat. Both of them were left gasping for air, but at least the arena around Izuku didn't spin anymore. Dark Shadow popped out from behind Tokoyami's once again very bird-like head and showed his closest equivalent to thumbs up, clearly in a chirpier mood than before. Izuku leaned back, his arms hanging loose, enjoying the feeling of relief like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. You know, he said just loud enough to be caught by the microphone. People act like I was going around stealing every quirk I see, but besides everything else they're wrong about, they don't get how hard that would be, just from a biological point of view. For a moment there I thought I was going to faint from 4 extra quirks, and 2 of those I've already had before today. He straightened up and grabbed Ijiro's hand in a very manly handshake until Ijiro raised his other arm and hardened it in the view of everyone. Great quirk, Izuku said. Love it. If it was possible for Ijiro to look any brighter than before he managed it. Anytime, dude. I just wish you had gotten to use it more. Me too. So did that help? Recovery Girl asked. Yeah, I'm already feeling much better. Good. Now if you excuse me, I'll have to go see how badly you shook that boy's insides with that explosion. She turned around and walked away with a clacking of her cane. Well, folks, Present Mike started narrating. The first-year tournament for this year is over, but remember to stay for the awards ceremony which will begin shortly. You can step in to wait while we prepare the arena, but don't go anywhere far, Midnight ordered to the students. Okay, Izuku responded and settled between Hitoshi and Ijiro as they headed back. Congrats, Izuku. We knew you'd win, Ijiro said. Hey, I was there too, Dark Shadow complained. Yeah, it was cool too. I didn't know you could fly together like that. Neither did I, Tokoyami said. Yes, we can fly, Fumi. I'll show you. Dark Shadow dove under Tokoyami, trying to become his wings like he had done with Izuku, but Tokoyami yelped and jumped back. Dark Shadow. Sorry, Dark Shadow said. Head down. Tokoyami took him into his arms and patted the quirk's head. I am excited too, but this isn't the place. We need to train somewhere in peace to master flight. Tomorrow, Izuku said, at the beach is a perfect chance for flight training, for both of us. That sounds good. Izuku reached out for Hitoshi's shoulder and pulled him close with an arm over his shoulders. Hopefully Toshi also recovers enough to participate in our training. That way we'll have a full 5 people for it. Never had that many people over. Izuku paused to look around. Wait, where's Tenya? Chapter 47. Turning up the heat. Where's Tenya? Right, Hitoshi started. His tone made Izuku immediately worried. Principal Nizu came to see him during your match and told him there is a phone call he needs to take. He never came back after that. Something squeezed Izuku's insides like an invisible hand had reached into him, about to rip something away. The words were innocent enough, except for the principal coming personally, but that fact, something in Hitoshi's voice, and Izuku's own instincts made a chill go through his spine colder than anything Todoroki could create. A phone was in his hand faster than even a notebook ever was. Hitoshi tilted his head. You kept a phone with you during the fights? Not at first, Izuku said while picking the number. I needed to pick up the phone for something. Good thing it didn't break. Izuku raised the phone to his ear and waited in silence. No one interrupted. Unfortunately, that included Tenya as the phone beeped busy. Eventually, Izuku gave up and began staring at the screen that was only showing Tenya's name and face. Izuku, he's okay, Hitoshi said. Maybe, he wasn't injured when he left, but I got a bad feeling about this. I feel the same, but it is something you can't control, probably, at least not right now. You just won the UA Sports Festival. Take a moment to enjoy this, at least until we can reach him. I know that, but...
No buts.
You've spent the whole day worrying about others. Can't you take at least this moment for yourself? Izuku stared at the ground for a moment before looking at Hitoshi again.
No.
His voice was apologetic, but not hesitant. Even if we don't know what is going on with Tenya. Todoroki, Hitoshi said, so what are we going to do about him? Izuku stared at him for several seconds. You think I'd let you walk into that mess alone, especially after what happened before? Ijiro told me about your encounter. Yeah, we aren't going to let you do that again alone, Ijiro agreed. Just tell me what you need. You guys, Izuku said and shook his head. You understand that anything we could do would put you on Endeavor's bad side. Never stopped you. If Tenya was here, he'd tell you to not get burned. Heh, too late for that, Ijiro said. So what do you want to do? There are only 2 things that can help Todoroki. One is to get him to change what he is doing. Easier said than done, Hitoshi said. The other is to take down Endeavor. Hitoshi didn't immediately say anything, so Izuku continued. Yeah, I know. The good news is he already doesn't like me. That's the good news? Hitoshi shook his head. It made him show his true colors. Before we only knew what Todoroki told us. Still can't believe it, Ijiro said looking down. I used to look up to him. Like most people, Izuku said and put a hand on Ijiro's shoulder. He is one of the best examples of how the current system worships people that don't deserve it. Right? Ijiro sighed but quickly perked up. So how can we help? Izuku smiled softly at the redhead. Just focus on Todoroki. Might need someone more unyielding to get through the ice he is hiding in. Ijiro stared at him, looking briefly confused. Oh, you mean figuratively? Yeah. I need to talk with him before the awards ceremony, but we aren't really getting along at the moment. I might be able to light his fire, but not in a good way. Maybe you should find him and soften him up first. We already agreed he needs people that can be his friends even when he pushes them away. Heh, that sounds like something you should ask Hananuki to do, but I can try. Ijiro ran off looking for his target, leaving Izuku, Hitoshi, and Tokoyami behind. You think he can get through Todoroki's ice? Hitoshi asked. If he can't, Todoroki might be a lost case. We still need to release Todoroki from his father either way. By taking him down? You know, there are a lot of people watching the festival. If Todoroki could share what he told us, the glowing man would get whacked, Dark Shadow declared, hovering next to Tokoyami. It might work, Izuku said, but Todoroki obviously isn't ready for that and I'm planning something better for the awards ceremony. Should still get Todoroki along for that, I guess. Oh, now I am interested. Hitoshi's smirk was so devious a clueless hero could have come to catch him as a villain. They headed in to look for their two-faced classmate. With the tournament over, most of their classmates were gathered at the waiting rooms, but as Izuku stepped in he couldn't see either of his classmates with red hair. Anyone seen Todoroki? A tentacle reached next to Izuku and formed a mouth at the end of it. Haven't seen him since his fight with Kirishima, but I heard someone shout Shoto earlier before Kirishima came asking about him. Izuku exchanged a concerned glance with Hitoshi. What direction did the shout come from? Hitoshi asked Shoji. The tentacle reached out of the door to point towards another corridor. Thanks. How about Tenya? Not since he left during the match, sorry. It's okay. Izuku shook his head. Thanks. Izuku left the room now, walking a little faster with Hitoshi on his tail. There weren't other people in the corridor that led from contestant areas towards some of the general audience and VIP areas. A door was open to one of the many doors to rooms different contestants and performers could use to prepare. Leave me alone, Todoroki shouted. There was a flash of orange light from the doorway. Izuku changed direction to sprint toward the commotion, only stopping a step before the doorway just long enough to hold out his hand, telling Hitoshi to stand back, which went promptly ignored as Hitoshi pushed past him and they both struggled to be the first to get in. Ijiro was hopping on one side of the room, still hardened and tapping out a fire that had caught on his sleeve and pants. Luckily, the damage was limited and to one side. Hitoshi went to check on their seemingly unhurt friend so Izuku could focus on the culprit. He was standing facing a wall with his back towards them. The entire left sleeve and much of the rest of his shirt on that side was gone, burned away. Izuku's stare was cold enough it could probably have put down Todoroki's fire if he was still using it. His voice carried a threat that needed no specific words to be felt. So you won't use your fire for contest, claim to refuse even using it to save people, but this is how you use it? To burn your classmate? Do you still want to get rid of it? Because that can most certainly be arranged. Izuku, why? Ijiro said to the side. Answer me. Izuku's open hand twitched, ready to tear the quirk away from the target of his ire. Todoroki turned around slowly. His burnt eye met Izuku's first. There was something in the stare, not anger or threat. Then he turned fully and his cheek on the unburnt side was covered in tears that flowed over a dark bruise just under his eye. Izuku's hand relaxed. Todoroki was holding his left arm against himself like he was afraid it would jump away and do something he'd regret. What happened? Izuku asked. Todoroki glanced at Ijiro. I did. He could barely speak and was twitchy, stuck deep into flight or fight territory. Izuku made sure not approach any closer or make any move that could seem like trying to touch the youngest Todoroki. He recognized the mental state Todoroki was in, and they didn't have the relationship to make approaching safe. Not that, Izuku said. You aren't going to convince me that Ijiro did anything that would justify this, and it doesn't seem like you either. So what happened? Todoroki didn't respond. Izuku spoke more quietly. What did Endeavor do? You didn't have that bruise after your fight with Ijiro. Todoroki looked away. Izuku sighed, his anger redirected. It must have been bad if it made you use your fire, and on Ijiro of all people. I thought I'd be the one to get burned. Izuku paused. He's angry you didn't win, right? Todoroki drew a shaky breath.
Yes.
He said he has gone too easy on my training and would correct that. And hit you. It wasn't really a question, but Izuku still waited in silence for a long time before giving up on getting a response. I can't say anything that would make it better. I can't imagine how it feels to be abused by both your pair. Flames flashed from the left side of Todoroki's face, hot enough to make the tears on the other side evaporate. Don't say that about my mother. Izuku stepped back, holding his hand in front of him in a calming motion. Okay, sorry. He really meant that. He would probably have reacted the same if they were talking about his mother. Todoroki cooled down faster than he would have and avoided eye contact again. This changes things. I thought you were just being stubborn, but you're actually afraid. Todoroki didn't contradict it, which was all the evidence Izuku needed. The rest is just an act, or maybe it is the only way you know to behave. Wouldn't be the only way in which you've been becoming another endeavor. At least that made Todoroki look at Izuku again. Don't, Izuku said. We have already had that argument. It is more important to ensure your safety first. I'm fine, you shouldn't. Don't make me slap you. I'd rather not burn my fingers, Izuku said. You aren't fine, probably haven't been in a long time. You are just refusing to get help, at least the kind you actually need. It's not your. It is, Ijiro said. You are our friend, right? And real heroes don't ignore people that need help. Todoroki looked at him for a moment, looking confused. You can't. We can, Izuku said, but you should. The one with the best chance to bring him down is you. I can't. How? Just tell people. The whole country follows this tournament. The idea of heroes might have been twisted to the point of being worthless, but even then, there are things that can break the illusion if exposed. I'd say Endeavor qualifies. I don't think it would work. People wouldn't believe it. Not if we said it without evidence. If his own son made the accusation, that would be different, but that is not the issue. For all your talk about denying him, you are afraid to oppose him, and we can't force you. But think about it. Today is the best chance you will have in a long time. And we'll be there with you, Ijiro said, or at least Izuku will be, for the ceremony. Todoroki preferred to look at the wall over responding to them. Izuku sighed and turned around himself. Whatever you decide to do, I'm going to do what I need to do. It's enough if you keep your fire under control. Not everyone can take it like Ijiro. Izuku took a few steps towards the door before stopping. You might not have experienced this before, but bullies don't stop if you kneel in front of them or even pretend to not care about them. I made that mistake for about 10 years. You need to either fight back or get away from them, and you don't need to fight alone. Bullies often don't. Your father is no different. Izuku left the room and walked a bit down the corridor before stopping and leaning on the wall. He wasn't feeling weak like after holding it together in front of All Might or talking about his mother, but had he done or said the right thing? It's fine, Hitoshi said from behind him. I think he needs someone who tells him things straight to his face. Not sure if that is enough, but I hope you really have a plan even without him. Yeah, but this, endeavor is even worse than we thought. You are talking like you weren't already plotting to destroy the man. Not hard enough. I feel almost bad for him, but remember your own advice. Hitoshi put his hand on Izuku's shoulder. Keep your fire under control. Endeavor can still burn you in more ways than one if you get careless. I'll do my best. The more reason something needs to happen today, with so many people watching. Izuku paused to draw a deep breath. Can you say what you want to say with so many people watching? Hey, Izuku snapped and forced an attempt of a comforting smile on his lips. I didn't even stutter with my earlier sales speech for you. True, we are so proud of you for that. Just keep it together till we get in the car. Okay, Dr. Shinso. Also, this is enough for you to worry about, so leave filling Tenya's missed calls list to me and looking after Todoroki to Ijiro. I'll try. Do or do not. There is no try, Hitoshi said with a completely straight face. Izuku tilted his head. Are you quoting movies in a situation like this? Hitoshi shrugged. If the words apply, does it matter where they come from? Izuku shook his head, but to his credit he did rather than just try. It took a cold shower despite not switching out of his sports clothes yet, but he managed to go through the wait without making any calls, at least calls to anyone his age. Todoroki borrowed someone's shirt to look representable for the ceremony, but other than that didn't speak to anyone, though Ijiro was never too far when Izuku saw him. Then it was time for the awards ceremony. Izuku met Todoroki and Hananuki at the corridor leading to the arena. Izuku gave a moment of attention to Hananuki. "Are you feeling well?" The former opponent's head perked up, and he gave Izuku his strange smile. "Well enough. I still feel a bit ill from how you shook my insides, but Recovery Girl assured me I got off easily. I am more hurt by how completely I failed in our battle." Izuku looked down, thoughtful for a moment. "You didn't fail, not exactly. You simply lack the means to get to me or hurt me. Your quirk can't impact someone flying in the air, unless there is something tall you can collapse onto them, and I was beyond your reach without a suitable quirk. As a hero, you could come up with ways, allies, or support items to get around that, but the tournament doesn't allow that. That would still mean that my abilities are lacking, as is my quirk." "Not really," Izuku said. "Every quirk has its powers and limits. Your works by touch. That gives it limits that make some people a better match for you than others. Winning isn't just about your strength, but how your abilities match your opponent and how you deal with your limits. That's just how it is. Everyone has to deal with it." "You too?" The question gave Izuku pause. He looked at his hands and the small holes in them. "Yes, sort of. I can add quirks to compensate for the weaknesses of others to not be so vulnerable. That is how I beat you." "I can see that, but that would mean you could avoid ever being at a disadvantage." Izuku hummed, not admitting to it audibly, but Hananuki understood the true power of all for one. "Okay, kids," one of the event staff interrupted. "Time to go." They stepped out in a line with Izuku first. 3 concrete platforms had been set up in the middle of the arena, with the middle one being the highest one. The rest of their classmates and other contestants were already gathered in a large formation opposite the platforms. Chapter 48. Exposed. Izuku climbed a set of small movable stairs to the tallest middle platform. The audience was surprisingly quiet. There was constant background chatter, but no large reactions to the winner's arrival, which was a relief with Izuku's thoughts and worries already running around faster than Tenya. He glanced at Todoroki, who was having a staring contest with the ground. "Todoroki," he said after making sure no one had microphones nearby, "your life will change today. How much depends on you. You aren't alone if you choose to speak up." Todoroki didn't respond, continuing his staring contest. Midnight stepped into the arena between them and the rest of the first-year students. "Thank you for staying with us through this festival. We will now give out the first-year awards. The man to give those awards is..." Izuku got a bad feeling about this, feeling a pressure squeeze his insides. "Ahahaha." All Might's laugh echoed from above. Izuku's blood ran cold. He couldn't deal with the number 1 and number 2 at the same time. All Might jumped down from the stadium roof far above and landed with a thud. "All Might, I am here." "Sorry," Midnight apologized. "I spoke over you." No, I should have waited a little longer." If there wasn't as much at stake, Izuku would have scoffed or rolled his eyes at their antics. "Now," All Might said, focusing on the trio, "congratulations. Today I witnessed an amazing performance from all of you." He looked at every one of them, stopping with Izuku a little longer than the others. All he got in return was Izuku's standard hostile stare. Number 1. Having the man around could be useful if Endeavor caused trouble, assuming he didn't side with his fellow hero, but Izuku wanted to vomit at the mere thought of needing the so-called hero for anything. All Might averted his gaze first, so at least that was a small victory for Izuku. Instead, All Might focused on Todoroki. They both did. He didn't directly face either of them, even as All Might hung the medal on his neck. "Young Todoroki, you demonstrated some great power out here today. Seems your loss was more about how your opponent matched your quirk. Perhaps you should utilize the fire of your quirk more." "That fool." That was all he got from Todoroki's fights? Todoroki barely muttered back. The tension and fear in his tone should have been obvious. "No, that's not. I can't use that." "It is okay. This school exists to help you master your quirk. Next year you might well become the champion. Congratulations, your father must be proud." All Might leaned to hug Todoroki, who didn't move a millimeter except to squeeze his hands into fists. Izuku was surprised and a little disappointed he didn't freeze over or catch fire right there. That would have taught All Might a lesson. Also, he'd better not try hugging Izuku if he wanted to keep his arms. Unfortunately, Todoroki remained quiet as All Might backed off. You should stop by the recovery girl before going home. Seems you got a bit roughed up. All Might pointed at Todoroki's face. Better safe than sorry. Izuku wanted to scream at the man's face, but to the surprise of at least 3 people in the crowd, he managed to contain his emotions, at least for now, as All Might moved past him to Hananuki. Masterful use of your quirk in turning the field to your advantage, but try not to depend so heavily on 1 or 2 ways of using it. In real life, you often cannot simply melt everything around even during serious battles. I appreciate your advice, Hananuki nodded. All Might stalled in front of him for many prolonged seconds as his eyes glanced at Izuku. Finally, he got over the death stare he received with every eye contact and moved to stand in front of Izuku. Young Midoriya, a stellar performance. You surprised us all more than once, demonstrating the value of flexibility and adapting to your opponent. You also had a lot to say to the people watching. How do you feel now that you have won and gotten those things off your chest? I haven't, Izuku responded, quietly reminding himself that saying something offensive about All Might would only make people less likely to listen to him. And many of them still aren't willing to hear me because of how I was born. People tend to listen to people they already predetermined to be heroic for whatever reason. Convincing them to change those assumptions takes more than words. Speaking of which, Izuku paused to look at Todoroki, who visibly drew a deep breath. You might want to take a closer look at Todoroki's face. Actually, Midnight should. She saw him close up after his fights. Notice anything new? Midnight's head perked up, and she exchanged a confused look with All Might. At least she still approached. The audience had gone quiet. She held her chin as she looked at Todoroki's face. Todoroki looked away. What are we looking at, foe? Was that there before? She pointed at the bruise. Seems he got off the tournament pretty lightly, All Might said, still ignorant.
No, Midnight corrected.
That wasn't there before. I looked over every student after the matches just in case of injuries. Izuku turned and jumped from his platform to Todoroki's to be closer to him and the microphones carried by their teachers. Being closer to All Might was just a price he had to pay. She is right. That injury, he paused. There would be no going back anymore, was caused by Endeavor. He didn't like his son losing. Not that domestic abuse was anything new to him. I guess that might happen when you buy a wife and start a family just to fabricate a custom quirk as a weapon for your own ends. The audience finally got involved as an uproar raised over the stadium. Unfortunately, most of them were attacking the villain kid for trying to slander an actual hero. Todoroki, Midnight spoke despite the noise and pointed to Todoroki's face with her finger. Where did this injury come from? It's not. Todoroki started and tried to take a step back. Izuku put a hand on his back. Todoroki, Midnight said more forcibly, how did you get it? Enough. Endeavor shouted as he flew to them, thrusted forward by his flames. Izuku could feel how Todoroki was literally shaking against his hand, which suddenly felt uncomfortably hot. I won't listen to such slander, especially from that villain kid. Remove him from my son immediately before he steals Shoto's quirk. Okay, let's all calm down, All Might said, holding his hands up in a calming gesture. I doubt young Midoriya would take young Todoroki's quirk. Izuku hated being defended by the so-called #1 hero, but he could always think of the man as a meat shield, and he was more concerned for Todoroki, who had started breathing much faster. He bit his teeth together. Endeavor stepped closer past All Might so his stare could fully hit Izuku and Todoroki, who instantly took a step back despite Izuku's efforts. If there had been something left of his usually cold, emotionless mask, it was now visibly shattering. Izuku bit his teeth together, forcing his own breathing to stay under control. He had gotten himself here. Now it was all or nothing, and Endeavor was starting to piss him off more than scare him. In front of the entire stadium, he let go of Shoto and stepped in front of him, gesturing at him. Does this look like a reaction of a son from a healthy family? There is certainly something fishy here, Midnight said, focused on Todoroki. All Might, don't let Endeavor any closer. But All Might started, but then reached his arm out to block Endeavor's way. The flaming garbage pile stopped, but his temperature started rising. His flames flashed. Todoroki jolted backwards so suddenly Izuku had to turn around to make sure he wouldn't fall off the platform. He too was heating up enough to make Izuku sweat. Then Endeavor's flames disappeared. It took him several seconds to realize it and glance at his hand, unable to produce fire. Izuku looked up at a small platform next to the booth where Aizawa and Present Mike had been narrating the festival. A completely bandaged man stood there, staring down at Endeavor. Now, Midnight turned to face Izuku. You have brought some serious accusations. While Todoroki's reactions tell me a lot, with such accusations you are going to need some kind of evidence besides your words against his to convince people, especially given the conditions you are facing. She glanced at the audience who weren't as loud anymore, but had a tone of disbelief, not of the surprised kind, but of the he must be lying kind. Izuku steeled himself and pointed at the microphone she was still holding. She got the message and handed the microphone over to Izuku. How about his words? Izuku said and pointed at Endeavor. Endeavor didn't just become a shit parent today. Mr. Aizawa, play it. Aizawa? Midnight asked. The only thing you need to worry about my family is to stay away from it, especially Shoto. He will be the greatest hero and doesn't need to be seen with people like you. Endeavor's voice boomed from the stadium speakers. The audience had a little gasp of surprise, but no strong reaction to the words. People like what? Izuku's voice joined in. People who would like to be his friends? You brat. You know what I mean. And what would be so wrong with him having friends? Shoto doesn't need friends. The purpose of his existence is to become the strongest hero. That is what I made him for, and that is what he will do whether he likes it or not. The audience had been surprisingly quiet, but that caused some muttering to go through the crowd. Anything that doesn't help that doesn't matter. Any sacrifice he needs to make he will make, and anything that stands in the way of that needs to stay away if it knows what is good for it. That sounds like a threat, but that wouldn't be very heroic. Should I take it as a threat? There was more muttering, but not an agreement for either side. At least you aren't stupid. Shoto will be the most powerful hero, but to be number one he must also be the most popular. I don't want him to be seen with the quirk stealer unless he is defeating you. Well, it is good neither of us take orders from you then. But you should already know that for your own sons, must have been a real disappointment when your abuse didn't make them submit to your will. Too bad you didn't learn after the first one. Them? Kirishima muttered on the recording. The entire audience pretty much shared his sentiment and fell quiet just as fast when Izuku began speaking on the recording. It was pretty shocking to hear how you have treated Shoto, but I was only surprised when I started looking into things more closely. It's pretty well known that you have 3 children. Not many know there is a 4th one. There was a 4th one, until there was a fire when he was alone. I wonder what you did to drive him into that. Enough. Endeavor shouted on the arena and tried to step around All Might, unsuccessfully. Meanwhile, the recording played the distinct sound of a hand hitting hard rock and fire sizzling between them. Kirishima, are you okay? Izuku's distressed voice sounded to the otherwise quiet stadium. The teachers glanced at the red-headed student, easy to spot in the crowd despite having gotten a new shirt identical with everyone else's. Yeah, that was nothing. Not sure I can handle it if he cranks up the heat though. I knew you were evil, but to attack students at their school is low even for you. Izuku's voice clarified what should have been clear from the sounds. You brat, don't pretend to be innocent and keep your nose away from where it doesn't belong. Some in the audience seemed to agree with him, clearly people with no hero potential. Afraid I'd find something you don't want the public to know, besides what I already did of course, anything that would ruin your heroic reputation? Now I am curious. Midoriya, the recording Kirishima whispered in his best Tenya that had been caught on the mic. Izuku would have to be more careful where and how he spoke while carrying his watch. Still, it was worth it. The recording was just coming to another good part. You are walking on thin ice, kid. Things can happen to people that take that kind of risk, especially for people with villain quirks. You could easily get arrested for trying to steal people's quirks if you don't know how to behave. Some in the audience muttered in agreement. Not really, since I don't do that, unless you were suggesting you'd make false accusations. Thinking a judge would believe the number 2 hero rather than the kid with a villainous quirk? I'm glad I don't need to explain your position. Make no mistake. I can make your life very unpleasant, and as far as anyone else is concerned, it would be you who is considered responsible for getting burned, and I do mean that quite literally. Stay away from my shoto. Izuku brought the microphone back up to his mouth. I wonder if all of them would believe you now that you have openly admitted you would lie and make false accusations to get what you want. Make your son what you want regardless of his feelings, and worse. I already knew the hero ranking system is rotten, but to name a domestic abuser number 2 hero. Izuku fell quiet and shook his head theatrically, letting the words sink in. The audience's muttering was hard to read, probably divided and in disbelief, but at least the teachers present, including Midnight and All Might, stared at him and Todoroki in shock. How dare you? Endeavor roared. I am raising Shoto to be the number 1. What would a villain like you know about that? I might not know what it is like being a hero, but neither do you. What I do know are bullies and people who think they are better than others just because of their quirk or power. You brat, someone needs to what? Beat me like you do to your son? Endeavor took a step closer. You will step away from him, or you are going to regret it. Hitoshi and Ijiro ran from the crowd of students and stood in front of the third-place podium. Tokoyami came after them, pulled by Dark Shadow. Midoriya, Todoroki said quietly. His voice shook like Izuku had never heard, except from himself, back quivering in front of bullies in Aldera and schools before it. He moved his hand up over Todoroki's shoulder like with Ijiro before, but holding him tighter as he stared at Endeavor. Todoroki's temperature quickly dropped down to near normal body temperature. I made the mistake of kneeling in front of bullies before. I won't make that mistake again. Everyone already heard what you are like behind the scenes. Are you going to show them and attack a bunch of students? You will. Endeavor fell quiet and stopped still mid-sentence, staring into nothing with empty eyes. Izuku brought the microphone to his mouth and looked at the audience around and above them. Ladies and gentlemen, the quirk brainwashing. It doesn't care how high you are ranked as a hero or as a villain. He gestured towards Endeavor with the microphone. He looked at Todoroki, who tried to return the gesture, but always returned to check on Endeavor. He's not going to get to you, Izuku said quietly. Yeah, Ijiro said a bit louder from below them. Hitoshi has brainwashed me many times. Endeavor isn't going anywhere until someone slaps him. Not that Aizawa and All Might would let him through anyway, Hitoshi added. Or me, Dark Shadow said confidently. See? Izuku said with a soft smile. You don't need to fear him. A rapid inhale was the only warning before Todoroki's legs failed him. Only Izuku's combat training let him react fast enough to catch Todoroki with his other arm and lower him gently on his knees as tears flowed down the unburnt side of his face. Izuku gritted his teeth, trying to push aside the anger at Endeavor to focus on the person needing rescue next to him. The rest of them climbed to the platform and covered them from the audience. They waited in silence until Todoroki got past the initial sobbing state where even breathing could be difficult. Izuku had a lot of experience of those from the past decade. Only once Todoroki's breathing slowed down and eased enough for Izuku to deem him past the worst did he push up against Todoroki's chest with his other hand to coax him into getting up. Once Todoroki was standing somewhat steadily, he brought up the microphone one more time. If you don't believe me or even Endeavor's own words, maybe you believe how his own son reacted to being protected from him, to having people care more about him than what he could do them. Izuku tossed the microphone away. Let's go. Where? Todoroki asked, unable to even properly look at Izuku. Even if I can't just. You aren't going to go anywhere where he can, Izuku assured. With what just happened, even someone in his position won't get away with what he has done. I can promise that. As can I. Izuku looked around, then down until he found the stern-eyed small creature that was their principal. Despite the creature's small stature, he was radiating something, danger that Izuku could feel deep down his throat. I take the safety and well-being of my students quite seriously. You can be assured of that. Please go inside somewhere more private. He glanced at all of the students on the platform. All of you. I will see to the situation out here. Izuku nodded and half-guided, half-dragged Todoroki with him back down from the platform. Hitoshi, Ijiro, and Tokoyami joined them. Hitoshi stopped next to the principal. When you need to wake him up, just have someone punch him in the face. I have been informed on the basics of your quirk Shinso. It is quite an impressive power, especially for de-escalating heated situations, truly the quirk of a hero. Hitoshi quickly caught up to the rest, having formed a bit of a smile over his previously grim expression. They soon entered the shade of the corridor and the noises of the audience dulled. Todoroki kept glancing back though. He's not going to follow us, Izuku assured. It helped a little. Instead of staring behind them, he was now staring at Izuku, tears still in his eye. They kept walking towards the dressing room without saying a word. Izuku never let go of him on the way. Aizawa was already waiting outside the dressing room, leaning against the wall like a mummy that had been misplaced in a museum. He had moved fast for someone who should probably still be in a hospital. He looked at them for a long, quiet moment. "How are you feeling?" Todoroki whispered. He shook under Izuku's arm. "I can't go home." "You won't," Aizawa spoke before Izuku could. "It would not be wise for you to go home right now, at least not until Midoriya's accusations have been investigated. Social services will likely show up soon to take you. I'll tell the guards at the gate to let Midoriya's car in and guide it here." Did this man read Izuku's thoughts or something? It wasn't difficult to predict what you would do. "Seems you have added Todoroki to the list of people to be protective over," Aizawa said. Clearly, yes, he did. "Don't waste time. Social services aren't going to let him leave with a bunch of teens if they get here first." "Leave, WHE?" Todoroki said, but Izuku pushed him to move forward and into the room. He already had his phone in his other hand. Chapter 49. V for Vigilante. A purse fell out of a robber's grasp as Bakugo's fist sunk into her cheek with the momentum of explosion-boosted flight. There was a crack and the wannabe robber slammed against the wall, instantly knocked out. "Tisk," Bakugo scowled at the middle-aged woman. He breathed a little faster than usually, but from brief excitement, not effort. She had run fast for her age, but that wasn't much to Bakugo, and she hadn't used any quirks trying to get away even when chased. At her age group, it was totally possible the woman might have been quirkless, not that it would have made any difference. Weak. He thought about picking up the purse the woman had stolen, but there was already an audible ruckus approaching from behind the corner. The owner would get her purse back. He quickly went through her pockets, finding a wallet with some cash, then held out the unconscious thief's arm and brought his shoe down on it hard enough to break the elbow with a satisfying crunch. He repeated the same with her other arm, then looked up. With a few explosions, getting to the roof of the building next to him was no different to him than walking up a handful of stairs. Looking down, some of the more heroic but unfit and slow bystanders reached where Bakugo had taken out the robber, followed soon by the victim and the ever-useless police. The victim thanked them profusely as they handed her back her purse as if they had anything to do with getting it back. Bakugo spat on the roof and walked away. Let them crawl on the ground. He was fine walking above them. He didn't even need his quirk to leap from one roof to the other, and that was more thanks to his own strength than the distance between the roofs. Looking down at the people crawling on the ground below was just a bonus from liberating himself of that existence, and if any of them took issue with him, well, he'd like to see them try and stop him. The criminals he encountered weren't giving him enough of a challenge. Of course, there was a dark side to everything as Bakugo soon arrived at the crappy motel he was staying at. The owner didn't even bother sticking around at the reception. From the sound of things, he was watching some adult movie in the back room again. Bakugo rung the bell on the reception desk and waited for a few seconds. When nothing happened, he bit his teeth together, scowling, and detonated a loud explosion on his palm. "Hey, shitty host. You want my money or not? What the hell you want? I said I want to pay for my room. You deaf or something? If you keep making noise like that, I will be." The owner of the motel finally stepped out of the back room, scowling at Bakugo. As if the fatso could have hoped to intimidate Bakugo. All he did was make his face more punchable. A series of small explosions sparked on Bakugo's palm. "I should just kick you out. Then who would pay you to stay in this dump? It's not exactly the trendiest place in the city. You need every yen you can get. Here, I'm going to stay another week." Bakugo handed him a bunch of cash from robbers that he had taken down. The man moved faster than he looked capable of to take it before Bakugo could change his mind. After counting them, he looked back up at Bakugo. "What are you still doing here?" Bakugo huffed and left to go to his room. That was another issue solved for at least one more week. As he walked, he counted what was left, not enough to eat for the week. He'd have to find more criminals, even if it was more small-time thugs, mutants, and purse snatchers. He wished there had been even one that could have at least given him a warm-up. Beating them up was turning into a chore more than a fight. How could pro heroes be worshipped for catching such nobodies? Bakugo slammed the door to his room shut behind him, not caring about the shouts from the motel owner. Bakugo already hoped the man would try something criminal, so he would get to crush the man. He might end up doing that anyway, but he didn't feel like finding a new place right now. As soon as Bakugo was in the room, he ripped off and tossed away the shirt he was wearing. He hated the thing, but it was a great robber bait. The oversized shirt would have fit the fat motel owner better, but with Bakugo, the long sleeves completely hid any muscles that would have made random scum think twice about messing with him, at least for now. The picture on the shirt was of some nobody hero, making him look like some fanboy nerd Deku whenever he wore the thing. In the right parts of town, he just needed to pass through a few alleys, glancing around like he was worried for his safety, and eventually some nobody would make the biggest mistake of their life. In a few cases, they made the smart choice to go after someone else, but did so too close to Bakugo, like today. Bakugo sat on the single creaky chair in his room by the equally old table and pulled out the purse snatcher's wallet. He'd already pulled out the cash, but had taken up a habit to check on people whose ability to eat solid food he had removed. Like lots of people, the wallet had some pictures of kids, one of them with an ugly mutation that made his face at least grow fur like some animal. Bakugo tossed the picture aside and pulled out the woman's ID card. He opened his laptop, and a search with her name brought up quick results, from sites cataloging the work of pro heroes, of course. No one would care about her specifically. She had been caught before by the hero Rocklock after failing at pickpocketing, and then they had apparently let her go to steal again from other people. She would find it much harder now that Bakugo was done with her. The article of the incident, on the other hand, praised the so-called pro hero for catching the criminal. Bakugo scowled. What could that hero even do? Make something he had touched stay still and, what, that was it? Yet still he was praised as a hero while Bakugo was staying in practically an actual dump, pretending to be some Deku to lure out small-time criminals. He could have easily blown up that so-called pro hero even without going through hero school. He trained better on his own, not wasting time on any useless things involved in going to high school. Bakugo closed the site before exploding the ID card into burnt plastic and paper, tossing the melted ashes in a plastic bag. He took a moment longer to scroll through news. Discussion of the USJ attack was still present, and there were some articles questioning the idea of having a quirk stealer at UA. There was even an image of Deku being surrounded by press outside the school. Bakugo smirked. At least he had made life a little harder for that quirk stealer. Unfortunately, the school seemed to stand on that albino hair's side. Probably they were just afraid of his lawyers. Then there was a picture of him with those two nobodies he dragged around since showing up at UA. They were sticking to him like glue, holding back the reporters. A video clip had that stupid shitty hair who had been in class, Kiri something, asking why they were so mean to Deku. Was no one at UA really able to show that Deku is place? He started sweating again while reading the article and had to hold his hands up, releasing small explosions to burn up the sweat after closing the article. The next one was about the hero killer that had been making headlines recently. Now there was someone that would have been worth Bakugo's time. If he took down the hero killer, even UA would have to admit they were wrong to kick him out. Though, as he read the posts about the hero killer and his supposed reasons for doing what he did, Bakugo couldn't help but feel there was something there. Tons of heroes were certainly fakes, or at least nowhere as strong as they thought they were, but they still got all the worship and money that should have gone to a real hero, someone like Bakugo. There was certainly space to weed out the weaklings. Bakugo closed the laptop and laid on the bed. It was still early, but he'd need to get sleep before the night. That was when he'd really go out to hunt. He slept easy, dreaming about fights and putting weaklings in their place, several of which had white hair, and maybe someone that could make him work for it. That one had shitty red hair. Something about that guy's face had managed to annoy Bakugo despite only knowing him for 2 days. But even in his dreams, he couldn't hit the rock-faced guy hard enough to wipe the grin off his face. He woke up scowling and eager to hit something softer. Thankfully, the sun had already gone down and outside was only darkness. Bakugo got his shitty shirt and headed back out. As much as he hated it, he had to admit his disguise worked wonders. As the first glimpse of sun reached over the horizon, he walked down into a cheap basement gym and headed straight to the bathroom to wash the blood off his hands. A couple of the early morning regulars might have noticed before he did, but they knew better than to get involved. One of them had just gotten up from the bench press to get a drink, so Bakugo started adding weights. The other guy never tried to contest his claim to the bench. Bakugo had developed a daily gym routine in the weeks since being driven out of UA, spending at least 4 hours a day at the gym training in lieu of formal hero training. He had always been fit, the strongest in any class he had been to since elementary school, but he had to push past any limits to be the absolute strongest. As he went through his routine, he had time to soak in those thoughts, at least until someone changed the channel on the old TV hanging from the opposite wall. The broadcast began showing a large stadium. "Welcome to the UA Sports Festival first-year tournament." A female hero, Midnight if he remembered correctly, declared. "Here are the students, contestants." Bakugo squeezed his weight bar harder. If he hadn't been focused in the middle of a squat, he might have told the extra with the remote to change the channel back. Instead, the bastard increased the volume as the busty heroine kept blabbering the standard formalities for such an event. Bakugo should have been there. He wouldn't have just won, but crushed everyone, especially after the past weeks of constant training and busting faces on real streets. Representing the students is Izuku Midoriya from Class 1A. The screen turned into an image of the students with one familiar white patch of hair in the middle. The entire gym shook as heavy weights fell on the floor, clanging and cracking something despite the thick covers on the floor. Bakugo stared at the screen, biting his teeth together with the weights on the floor in front of him completely forgotten. What little talk there had been going on in the gym had ended like it hit a wall. So the voice from the TV was that much more audible as that quirk-stealing Deku got to talk in front of the whole country. The audience seemed to have some sense about who and what he was, but still, the stare in Deku's eyes wasn't what Bakugo knew, at least not from the time before Auntie Inko died. At UA he had been different. "Yes," he began his speech, not even seeming to quiver in front of the audience. "I am the one who can transfer quirks between people. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Not the other thing you people have kept repeating for the past 3 weeks. Welcome to your annual watch teenagers punch each other in the face for your entertainment day." Bakugo wanted to blow something up, but could only listen as Deku ranted something about the school and the world in general being unfair for weaklings, and him knowing things better than pro heroes. "I am here because I got first in the entrance exam. But did you know the person who came second? The person everyone has told he would become a great hero since his quirk manifested. Well, as soon as he was told he could use his quirk at UA, it took him all of 2 days to commit assault, threats of violence, and an attempted murder, and later to get kicked out. So much for selecting the people with most potential to be heroes." "You think that is really true?" someone at the gym asked. To UA's credit, they actually took his behavior seriously, eventually. Hard to believe, but surely the school would deny it if he was lying? Bakugo's vague thirst to detonate something began focusing on the present company. Deku moved on to attack their previous school and talk about lawsuits again. His daddy's lawyers had to be the reason the school and the extras there seemed to side with that bastard. "Also, if you have called me the quirk stealer, and this goes especially to the representatives of media, this is the person who created that name and told you about me. Great job at being critical of your sources, not." So Deku figured out how the word of him got out. Well, Bakugo didn't care. Congratulations for all the reporters involved in spreading the hate and lies of a violent near murderer. "For sure," an extra at the gym responded. "Those are pretty serious accusations." Sparks of little explosions went off on Bakugo's palms. Or maybe he is just directing people's attention away from his own quirk stealing. I wouldn't feel at ease near someone like that. At least someone at the gym had a working brain. "Hope it earned you enough money to hire some good lawyers." Deku was still talking. "Because you're going to need them. If you are lucky, I might settle for your quirk as a settlement." "See," the same person at the gym said. The rest seemed uncertain as Bakugo managed to tear his eyes from the screen during a pause in Deku's rant. "Maybe," another guy said hesitantly, He seems to be out for people's quirks. Of course he is. Bakugo roared and emphasized his words with a bang, making the people jump back. Speaking of which, Deka spoke again. Bakugo turned his attention back to the screen. If you aren't using your quirk, like most aren't allowed to, don't need it anymore, find it harmful for your well-being, or just need money, I am in the market for new quirks. There is a limit to how many I can take, but I'll pay 1,000,000 yen, and up to at least 100 million yen for good quirks. If you are interested in selling yours, email me a description of your quirk at Sell Your Quirk. He seriously expected someone to give up their quirk to him just for some of his dad's money? Well, maybe some weaklings or addicts would do it, but those quirks would be worthless. So what do you think about that? One of the extras at the gym asked again, kind of going after people's quirks, but is there anything wrong to try to buy them? Bakugo stepped aside from where he had been lifting and grabbed another weight right in front of one of the extras who had been reaching for it. Bakugo paid no attention to his complaints as he added more weight for himself. Let Deku complain in front of cameras and play with other students. Bakugo would still come out on top as the strongest and take Deka down to where he belonged, and those that actually called him friend would go down with him. If there was something that could make Bakugo stronger, it was anger, and he stayed at the gym training for hours past his normal schedule. Whenever his body tried to tell him to take a break, he only needed to take a glance at the TV to get more energy. The standards at UA were even lower than he had thought as Deku came first in the first race, and no one seemed to even take issue that he had stolen yet another quirk, some kind of flight or rocket quirk. Didn't matter. Bakugo's quirk could do that too, and more, just with the one power. Unfortunately, that wasn't the last win that Deku had, and even Bakugo couldn't increase his weights by a lot every time he did. Bakugo only stopped briefly as he witnessed Deku's first fight in the final tournament. He never expected the bastard would have it in himself to put someone in that kind of condition, let alone someone he called a friend. Bakugo shook his head. Of course Deku could do that. He was just letting the villain he tried to hide seep out. The people around him were just too naive to understand that. Eventually the tournament had to end, and Deku, of course, used power taken from others to win it. That bastard! Bakugo screamed and threw his dumbbell against the wall just as the win was announced. The weight sank deep enough into the wall it hung on for several seconds before falling off. Hey! The gym owner shouted. What do you think you are doing? None of your business. Bakugo screamed back without even looking at the guy. This is literally my business, and you aren't welcome anymore. Bakugo finally turned to face the gym owner and gritted teeth together when he had to actually look up at the guy. To his credit, the man used his own service all day rather than sitting in a back room or leaving the gym to its own devices. His useless quirk had something to do with his sense of smell that turned his nose into a dog-like snout, but in physical terms he was certainly stronger than even Bakugo, for now, taller too. Are you going to leave on your own? Or do I have to drag you out? I'd like to see you try, Bakugo said as his hands smoked. Can your family afford the funeral? Out. They stared for a long moment, but eventually Bakugo sked and turned away. It's a dump of a gym anyway. Bakugo went to the dressing room to get his stuff. He shoved the thief-bait shirt in his bag. With several blood stains, he'd have to wash it again, and he really wasn't in the mood to wear the stupid thing, even if pounding some extra was exactly what he needed right now. He headed out to a neighborhood known for how easy it was to get drugs there. Dealers tended to have more money than purse snatchers anyway. Just had to notice them before they recognized him. It wasn't Bakugo's first trip to the neighborhood, and the word was already getting around. He checked every street, yard, and alleyway as soon as he reached the corner. A couple of people took a glance at him, but turned around as soon as they encountered his stare. His "Kill Deku" stare hadn't gone anywhere since he left the gym, and now he'd have to find a new place to train his body, all because of that quirk-stealing bastard. If Deku had ran into Bakugo now, he would not have survived. Here on the streets, he would not have rules or teachers to come to his rescue. Bakugo dreamed about such an encounter as he strode through the neighborhood, but still remembered to glance around the corner as he passed an alley. He stopped. There was a whole group of people, half a dozen of them, though some looked withered, almost skeletal from drug use and lack of gym time. The whole group seemed to face just one guy that was obscured by the group. The nature of the meeting, though, was clear. especially considering the brass knuckles and knives present. It was just the exercise Bakugo needed to vent his anger. He didn't really care what the one guy had done to get the ire of these thugs. The first time they noticed Bakugo's presence was caused by an explosion that propelled him towards them, sinking his fist in one of the withered drug addict's already sunken cheek just as it was turning to face him. Several smaller explosions halted Bakugo's momentum and let him turn fast to bring his feet into another addict's stomach, causing him to double over and hit the wall. Both weaklings were knocked out cold right away, but their four friends were now fully aware of Bakugo's presence. Still, Bakugo could only grin in his signature deranged, "I am going to kill you" way. Two of them wore brass knuckles and something about their arms seemed off, besides being thick, that is. One had a big knife on his hand and whiskers like a cat on his face. The last one had a crooked chin with staples holding the skin on it together. He held his fingers together, and his hand formed into a metallic-looking blade that he pointed at Bakugo. "Not sure who you think you are, but you played with the wrong people. We're going to give you a quick lesson. Not that you'll be in any shape to learn from it." The guy with whiskers grinned. "You better learn quick, because this guy has to see his lawyer. Got beaten by a kid with good lawyers, so he'll enjoy taking it out on another little kid like you." "Shut up, cat." The sword-handed guy shouted and grabbed Cat, yanking him towards Bakugo. Bakugo launched forward, sinking his fist in the cat guy's gut, pushing him backwards, but the guy twisted and flexed like rubber and landed perfectly on his feet. Bakugo didn't even have time to tisk as he had to jump back. The arm of one of the other guys had launched forward, stretching at the speed of a fast punch. Bakugo dodged the first strike, but as his friend joined in, another strike glanced Bakugo's side. He landed crouching a little, but didn't even have time to draw a breath before the next long-distance punches. Bakugo launched himself up into the air with explosions, easily maneuvering to avoid hasty punches from his opponents that hadn't expected his flight. With a bang, his foot was in one of their faces. He turned around to take on the other one. His spine bent from the impact as the guy under him wasn't out yet. The brass knuckles sunk into his back as air and spit got pushed out his mouth. He grit his teeth and drew another breath. A set of explosions with more force than that came off his hands daily. This was nothing. A rapid motion entered his field of vision. He leaned back, but still a sharp pain went through his face. Blood dripped on his left eye, but he barely cared, staring wide-eyed at the sword-handed thug. The iron stench of blood snuck up his nostrils. Bakugo got somewhat back on his feet and jumped to the side so as to not be hit in the back. "How the hell is he still moving? I got him right on the spine," the stretchy arm guy on the ground gasped. That extra had to wait for a moment as Bakugo kept staring at the sword hand. "You!" Bakugo roared and pushed his open hand forward, any restraint forgotten. "D!" The hasty explosion pushed even Bakugo back until he hit the wall as a result of the shockwave reinforced by the small space. For a moment he couldn't hear or see anything in the dust-filled alleyway. Slowly the dust dissipated in complete silence, revealing the sword-handed guy. His legs were exposed first. He slumped against the ground. Then the lower half of his torso fell against the red wall. Red wall? It hadn't been that before. The dust continued dissipating, but there wasn't much more of the man to expose. The middle part of his torso was a ripped and torched mess. Anything above his lower chest no longer existed except across the wall. Bakugo's throat got squeezed, making it difficult to breathe as it felt like something was coming up. Bakugo squeezed his nose and drew a deep breath through his mouth, easing the feeling. He still stared at the corpse he had made, but the wide-eyed look he started with narrowed quickly. A horrified look tried to find its way onto his face, but his lips slowly twisted into a rough approximation of a grin. "Seems you're the one who needed to learn a lesson," he sneered. "Too bad you aren't in shape to learn from it." He spat on the corpse and turned around to give a literal death stare to the rest of the gang. The people he had knocked out before were still out cold, one of them bleeding profusely from being unlucky enough to be close to the explosion. The rest had all been tossed to the ground by the shockwave, and were now staring at Bakugo in a dazed terror. Bakugo put his hands into his pockets, once again confident in the harmlessness of these weaklings, as he stepped closer. "So," he said deceptively quietly, "who's next?" He was interrupted by a groan and raised his gaze to the guy he had completely forgotten, the one this group of thugs had been threatening. His appearance actually gave Bakugo more pause than facing the whole armed group. Half of the man's skin, especially his arms and upper torso up to his face, was totally messed up and darkened, as if it had been burned repeatedly. The lower half of his face seemed like it was attached to the upper half with staples. He was standing almost exactly where he had been when Bakugo arrived, maybe a little further back. Despite being mobbed by a group of thugs and looking already like he should have been hospitalized, the man looked relaxed, like there was no issue with the situation as he pulled a pair of earplugs out of his ears and put down the phone he was watching. The grin on his face left Bakugo's in its shadow. "Could you be a little more quiet? I was watching the best show of the year." He glanced at the remains of the now dead guy and started walking past the others to Bakugo. "I guess I should thank you. Most people wouldn't take on 6 people to help some stranger." He glanced at the corpse. "I would ask if you were some kind of hero, but you really don't seem like that. A vigilante, perhaps. And what do you care if I was?" Nothing right now at least. Doesn't change what you did. Though I wonder." He was now next to Bakugo and turned to face the surviving thugs. "What are you going to do about them now? You've only finished off one of them. Going to call the cops and give that guy's lawyers new clients?" "Hell no," Bakugo said and stared at the thugs that were barely daring to scramble away on their feet or inch slowly backwards. He held his hand up with small explosions sparkling on his palm. He took a step forward but hesitated. One of the stretchy arms and the cat guy finally processed the danger they were in and bolted into a sprint. At least they had finally understood Bakugo was well above them. The thought was exiting. Now if his body would just move to finish the job. "So you are still as green as you look. Fine, I'll cover for you this time. Consider us even." The half-burnt man raised his open hand towards the group. It glowed blue for an instant, and the next second the entire alley in front of them was turned into a literal hellfire of blue flames and screams of agony that didn't last long. Bakugo dealt with hot explosions constantly, but despite not being in the direct line of fire, he jumped back as the air became intolerably hot. Once the burst of flames ended, all that was left were barely recognizable, still-burning masses on the ground with vague shapes of limbs coming out of them. "You make for good fuel," the burnt psycho muttered, then spun around light on his feet like he hadn't just murdered a bunch of people. "We should leave. Considering how loud you were, someone is going to come see what is going on." "Who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" Bakugo barked. "The name is Dabi, and you can do whatever you want, but I am not planning to stick around to explain to the police what happened here." "Are you?" He walked away without waiting for a response. Bakugo picked his bag up from around the corner at the mouth of the alley and wiped blood off his face with his gym towel as he grumpily followed Dabi. Chapter 50. Comfort and Safety. The car stopped in front of Izuku's house, and he opened the door before the driver could get out and do it for him. Unlike usually, he wasn't sitting in the middle, as he had given that to and pushed Todoroki into that seat with Ijiro on the other side. Their two-faced classmate had not said a word during the entire drive ever since he had calmed down enough to be quiet in the first place. Izuku stood aside to make way for Todoroki to step out. "Come on," Ijiro encouraged him. "You got to see Midobro's place. It's amazing." "Midobro," Hitoshi muttered, clearly plotting against Izuku, but withheld any more comments as he turned on his spot on the front seat, smiling at Todoroki. "He's not wrong." Todoroki slid from the middle seat and stepped out, making the back seats a little less cramped for Ijiro and Tokoyami, all of whom had somehow crammed in the car that technically didn't fit that many. On top of that, Dark Shadow seemed to have a little dog in him, as he liked to hang out of the car window. As everyone got out, they gathered at the edge of Izuku's driveway. Todoroki wasn't interested in anything, staring mostly in the empty air. Dark Shadow, on the other hand, was staring at the house, his equivalent of a mouth hanging open. "Fumi," he said, "I don't think we can get him a house as a thank you." Tokoyami sighed. "Just wait till you see it from the inside," Ijiro said. "The baths are especially great after a good spar outside. And no fake heroes welcome," Izuku added, talking to Todoroki, "especially number 2s. He put his hand on Todoroki's shoulder, and they walked towards the door. Fumikage and Dark Shadow kept looking around. "Most impressive. I can see why you choose to train here." There is plenty of space, though I believe I can see where Ida has changed directions while running. He looked at some foot-wide patches of upturned grass, then paused and pointed at a large boulder shattered from the top and split in two. What happened there? Oh, that, Ijiro said. Izuku just tested how that rock, Hitoshi pointed at the shattered boulder and then at Ijiro, would do against this rock. It was a one-sided fight. So, you use rocks as punching bags for training? No, Ijiro said, though now that you mention it. Not on my yard, Izuku shouted over his shoulder. Also, I already ordered a steel cube for that. Just be patient until it gets delivered. You did? Ijiro asked, surprised, and smirked. Cool. I can't wait. Though after today, I'm not sure how long even that will last, Izuku muttered. My fists are hurting just from imagining it, Hitoshi said. Want to try with my quirk? Ijiro asked without hesitation. That even got Todoroki to react and glance back at them. Hitoshi shook his head, but not in a refusal. You were something else? Hitoshi sighed. Yes, I would like to try that. Great. We just need to ask Midobro to transfer my quirk. The answer is yes, Izuku said as he unlocked the door. But not today, or Recovery Girl is going to come after me. Even the principal and Mr. Aizawa seem to fear getting on her bad side, and I don't want to find out why. Inside, Izuku escorted Todoroki straight to the large sofa in the living room to sit down in peace. The whole group fit easily with plenty of space left over, but Izuku and Ijiro did not leave any around Todoroki. Are you? Izuku started trying to figure out what should be said in such a situation. Feeling any better? A bit, Todoroki said quietly, but I don't. You shouldn't have gotten involved. It's my problem. Now he is going to hurt you too. He might try, Izuku said. His voice was colder than Todoroki's ice. You need to stop acting like you need to do everything alone. The whole point of heroes is supposed to be to meddle in other people's problems even when there is risk. Real heroes can do that even without thinking. One actual hero described it as his body moving before he could think. Ijiro's head perked up, but he didn't say anything. Hitoshi noticed though and smiled. Izuku turned to face forward instead of them. I'm honestly not sure what to do or say next, but Endeavor isn't going to get you here or know anything you do or say, so just do what feels right to you. Todoroki drew a shaky breath, still near the edge of losing control. He leaned forward and brought his hand to cover the burnt half of his face. It was like his usual calm, cold and collected mask didn't exist anymore. I've never had that, especially since Mom. He fell quiet. Can we do something else? Anything else? I think I need time. Of course, Izuku paused. I think I did promise you a victory party, but I'm not sure if that is. It is. Are you sure? I don't want you to just sit quietly all evening because of me, and it might be nice. If you feel that way, then party is what you'll get. Oh yeah. Ijiro shouted, suddenly startling Todoroki. We are going to have such a party you forget Endeavor exists. With those words, a miracle happened. It might not have been a quirk technically, but Ijiro certainly had the power to make people smile, and Todoroki's lips most definitely just twitched upwards at least a little bit. Then Ijiro went to get some music on while Izuku ordered food. His phone rang soon after finishing the order. Izuku checked the caller information and gulped. Hey Dad, he responded to the call and moved further away from the others. Quite the show you put on, Izuku, a bit more than I expected, even knowing you planned to act against Endeavor. I know. Things kind of just happened, but Endeavor was even worse than I thought. I couldn't just... He paused. I know, and it was wonderful. I wish I could have seen his face before you brainwashed him. So you are not angry? I am concerned whether you have plan or are merely acting impulsively, but in terms of the end results so far, why would I be angry? Despite everything he has done, Endeavor is still one of the key pillars for the current hero system. If you take him down on the side just because you like his son, I am not going to complain. I am glad to hear that. Though I am not yet convinced on your apparent plan to kidnap and adopt said son. Dad, Izuku whined. It didn't help he could hear Tamura sniggering in the background. People around Izuku looked mostly surprised. Izuku, Dad said, making him quiet down. How many hero students are currently hanging out at my house? 4, besides me, and Tenya isn't here. I don't remember telling you to start a side branch for UA. Dad, You don't need to explain. I know what is going on, but don't forget your goals are goals. I won't. And try to think before you kidnap and adopt people. I already have you and Tamura to look after and need Kirojiri just to handle the two of you. Dad. The bastard laughed while on the call. Very well. I'll let you pass on today's training since you won and need to keep an eye on your strays. At least try to see if any of them can see reason with how the world is now. Izuku sighed as he closed the phone. He wasn't the only one on the phone at that point as Hitoshi was typing something. Todoroki looked at Izuku thoughtful with a hint of worry. Izuku smiled back reassuringly. Eventually they ended just back on the sofa, but eating pizza this time. Ijiro even got Todoroki to talk, even if he was still sitting stiffly as he discussed their fight. You know, your fire stung, Ijiro said, but I might have been able to take it long enough to get to you. I never stood a chance with your ice. Seems better to capture villains too. Not like you want to burn them alive. That's true, Izuku said. You should still use both of them. Just because half of your parents are bad, it doesn't mean half of you is. You need to consider what is best for you. Todoroki looked down thoughtful, hopefully. So, I should just ignore them? Endeavor, yes, your mother. Izuku paused. I guess that isn't too clear-cut. I might not be the best person to talk about this. It's okay. I haven't even seen her in years. Izuku glanced at him but held back from saying anything more that could turn the discussion in a wrong direction. That's terrible, Ijiro commented. I mean she. He gestured at Todoroki's face. But wasn't that because of, you know? That was because of Endeavor. Todoroki choked and shook a little. Without a word, Izuku brought his arm over Todoroki's shoulders. Ijiro did the same, trapping Todoroki between rock and a hard place, but in a good way. At least the shaking ended. But your mother is still around, right? Ijiro continued. So you could visit her? Might be good for the both of you. Todoroki took a moment to answer, seemingly focusing on controlling his breathing before he could do so. No, he said. I've managed fine without her. I don't think. Clearly not, Izuku said, squeezing Todoroki's opposite shoulder. If you really believe you have managed fine or anything of the sort. Maybe, but I don't need her. I don't know how I would. Either she is going to hurt you like Endeavor, and you need to keep your distance, or you should see her while you have the chance. That chance won't last forever. Izuku paused for a longer moment. You may be able to live without her, but that doesn't mean you'd want to. Hitoshi, who had been sitting in the opposite end of the sofa, got up and walked around its slice of pizza, still in hand, to settle on the narrow space left on Izuku's other side. Others, including Todoroki, followed the movement in silence. Izuku eased his hold on Todoroki's shoulder. What happened with your mother was because of Endeavor. If you abandon her, that will just be another win for him and wrong to her. Don't do anything that you would regret for the rest of your life. What? Todoroki started, but stopped, seeming to watch past Izuku. Izuku glanced around at Hitoshi, but he was just looking at them with his neutral face as appropriate for the situation. The whole group sat in silence for a long time, except for the music still playing in the background. Maybe we should watch a movie or something, Izuku muttered. Sounds good, Todoroki responded. No one else argued against the idea, and Ijiro turned down the music, but Izuku never even got the remote before the doorbell rang. Izuku's head perked up. Who could it be? He bounced up and with a single push flipped full 360 degrees over the sofa's backrest without even grazing anyone in the narrow gap they had left for him. By the time anyone else had gotten up, he was already on his way to the front door. He opened it to encounter just what he expected and feared. Tenya was standing outside, which was good, but the look in his eyes was tired and empty, like Izuku didn't remember ever seeing. He stepped aside to let Tenya in, and he did wordlessly. As they got into the living room, space suddenly appeared on the sofa so Tenya could sit next to Hitoshi, followed by Izuku, Todoroki, Ijiro, and Tokoyami. Izuku struggled to resist the urge to bury Tenya in questions, accepting that for now, the only thing he could do for Tenya, for both of the people next to him, was to be there and wait. Tenya squeezing his hands was the first warning that the wait was coming to an end. Have you read about the hero killer? He asked with a shaky voice. Izuku's guts felt like Tamura had touched them. Stain? Hitoshi asked quietly, like he was afraid once again that his voice could cause harm. Izuku gasped. Ingenium, he blurted out, only regretting it once the last letter came out of his mouth. Tenya's head dropping showed he was correct, at least partially. He's not dead, Tenya said. A weight dropped from Izuku's shoulder. He said Stain spared his life to spread the word of what he is doing, but he still injured Tensei, badly. The doctors, they aren't confident if he can ever walk again, or run, or be a hero. They've already asked help from some quirk healers, even Recovery Girl, but they don't think it is going to be enough. Tenya's head dropped onto his hands, and he wailed for the first time. Izuku closed his eyes. He couldn't exactly act high and mighty towards someone for attacking a pro hero, though Ingenium seemed to be one of the better ones. Not that any of that mattered. Izuku was self-conscious enough to understand he really only cared because Ingenium was Tenya's brother. That didn't ease the pain of having Tenya grief next to him. It took a moment before he could talk more. Tensei never wanted anything but help people, help them quickly before they had to suffer, and that monster just chose to cripple him for no reason. Something about fake heroes. As he spoke, Izuku's gaze traveled down to see Tenya squeezed his hands into fists. No one else noticed being focused on his face. Tenya spoke relatively calmly for the situation, but there was a dark tone in the background of his voice that made Izuku concerned. It simply ran contrary to everything the by-the-book good guy Tenya represented in his eyes. It was like if Hitoshi couldn't think of anything to say because of some bad reason. Then again, Hitoshi wasn't saying anything and gave Izuku a sad look past Tenya that told he didn't know what to say. Things had been going so well, or at least in the right direction, but now Izuku would not have been surprised if the world decided to end. That's so messed up, Ijiro muttered. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. No, Tenya said, perhaps a little hesitantly. I would not have come here if I didn't want interruptions. Sorry, I shouldn't involve you with my family issues. Izuku and Hitoshi stared at each other, glanced at Todoroki, and then at each other again. Hitoshi was the first one to speak. You are talking next to someone who basically declared war on the number 2 hero in the country to get involved in a classmate's family issues. Not that you stayed out either. You must have gotten hit in the head during the festival if you think you could deal with this alone, whether you want it or not, Izuku added in a low tone. Part of him was disappointed in that Tenya would even worry about that, but mostly he was thinking about what to do about Stain. Considering the attention he was getting, Tamura might want to go after him anyway, and Izuku might have to tag along. Yeah, Ijiro added his carefully worded encouragement. Todoroki was mostly looking around confused. Izuku put his hands on Todoroki's and Tenya's backs. Neither of you should stay alone tonight. We'll start our weekend sleepover a day early. Well, Todoroki has to stay anyway. Actually, he glanced at Ijiro and Tokoyami. Everyone can stay. I am honored by your invitation, Tokoyami said. But are you sure it is no trouble? It is more trouble not having anyone around, Izuku responded. It's a big house to be in alone. Tokoyami looked at Izuku for a long time. Dark Shadow even popped out to do the same. We will stay to walk in the same shadows as you. If he had only known all of them. Izuku turned back towards his oldest friend in the group, his hand still on Tenya's back. If the injury only happened today, there is still uncertainty if his injuries are as bad as they seem. You said the doctors aren't confident, not that they are certain. Yes, but...
No buts.
Sounds like his life isn't in immediate danger, so you can check on him tomorrow after a good night's sleep of not thinking about it. Tenya sighed. You're not going to give me a choice, are you? Izuku shook his head. Did you ever expect one? Don't even try to avoid it. I still have Toshi's quirks. I think I'll welcome that when it's time to go to sleep. What are you talking about? Todoroki asked. My quirk can make people sleep, Hitoshi said. That's why Izuku borrowed it the first time. Don't worry about staying up thinking about things. It's not permitted in this house. Except when Izuku was there alone. He didn't say that out loud and maintained a soft smile. I see, Todoroki said. That sounds good. Your quirk is a good one. Good enough to beat you, Izuku said and blinked. Did I say that out loud? Yes, Todoroki said. Didn't you hear yourself? Izuku shook his head. It is probably best to get you two something else to focus on. I'll put a movie on. Are we finally going to start that sequel trilogy? Hitoshi asked. No, some of us have already endured enough for one day. No need to torture anyone anymore. I was thinking a bit of 1980s comedy. There's this movie about a police academy. It's not quite the same as a hero school, but sounds good. Your movie picks tend to be ancient, but I haven't been disappointed yet. To Izuku's credit, the movie worked out to be a decent distraction. Especially Todoroki's appearance changed over the evening. Losing most of his stiffness and as tension disappeared from him, he slumped against the backrest and partially against Ijiro. Izuku took that as a sign that he was at least feeling secure there. He'd never seen Todoroki relax like that, or okay with people around him like that. He even handed Kirishima a can of soda with his right hand when Ijiro just reached toward it. "Oh, that's cold," Ijiro said after taking a sip. "Thanks." If Tenya just could have relaxed the same way. Not that Izuku could have done that in Tenya's position. He would have been either flooding the room or plotting bloody murder, possibly both at the same time and quite literally at that. Despite that he wished Tenya would be better than him. Surely that wasn't a too high bar to cross. Eventually the movie ended, and they were left in an awkward silence. Normally Izuku would have loved to just sit there with his chosen company, but the tension of the day weighed on all of them, and Todoroki was already dozing off, completely drained by the day's events, only stopped from falling on his side by Ijiro's shoulder. Izuku looked around the group much larger than before. "How about we'll go to sleep early? I think everyone could use the rest, and Ijiro might have to carry Todoroki if we wait any longer." Todoroki glanced up, having heard his name, but his look was unfocused. Ijiro smirked. "That's fine. He doesn't look that heavy." I lifted and threw Hananuki with one hand. "While using your quirk," Izuku said. "You wouldn't consider any one of us heavy?" "More than one," Hitoshi added and turned towards Izuku. "The bigger question is where you are going to fit us all. The room only has 3 beds, so at least some have to stay down here and try to fit on the sofa beds." Izuku reacted in a very Ijiro way before bringing his hand up for Hitoshi-style back of the neck scratch. "I'd rather have everyone together, and, well, it's better we go take a look and sort things out." He got up, looking at the 3 newest visitors. "Come with us." Izuku led them all to the sleepover room and pushed the door open in front of Hitoshi, who took one look inside. "I should have known." Izuku scratched the back of his neck again. "I didn't expect all this, but I thought about inviting Ijiro to stay overnight this weekend." Where there had previously been 3 beds arranged around a low triangular desk, there were now 4 around a square one. The room was just large enough to fit that. The rest of the group peeked inside. "Welcome to the sleepover room." "Cool," Ijiro said. "Todoroki can have my spot if you want to keep him with the group." "No," Izuku said. "I said I want to keep everyone together. If we push stuff closer to each other, we can carry in my bed and one of the sofa beds. I can go get the bed with Ijiro and Toshi if the rest of you bring the sofa. With dark shadows help, it shouldn't be too hard." "I'll toss it up, no problem," the quirk popped out to declare. "I'm a really useful quirk." "Yes, you are," Izuku confirmed, and they got to work. With 6 strong hero students and couple suitable quirks, some rearranging of heavy furniture took no time at all, though even in this house 5 beds and a sofa bed in one room got a little cramped, taking up all the space in the middle with just enough for narrow walking paths on both sides. "See, no problem," Izuku declared. "Until you decide to bring more strays home," Hitoshi said. It made Izuku chuckle, and he wasn't the only one. "Well then, I just have to have Ijiro punch the wall. The room on that side is empty." "Hey, don't forget me," Dark Shadow shouted. "I can make even bigger hole than him." "I'll keep that in mind. For now, this is enough." "Hey," Ijiro interrupted. "I just remembered. I never prepared to stay overnight. Didn't even bring my toothbrush." Izuku raised his hand to point at a cabinet in the corner. He'd taken the time to make sure any guest would have all they need, from toothbrushes and dry towels to pajamas in sizes that just happened to roughly fit the people currently present. Even Tenya had 2 in his size. A side effect was that everyone ended up looking the same in identical pajamas, green like Izuku's childhood hair. Ijiro threw a couple of punches and kicks at air after changing to pajama pants. To absolutely no one's surprise, he didn't bother with the top half. It's not bad, a bit too warm. You were supposed to sleep in it, not train in it, Hitoshi pointed out. Maybe, but I can't think of better way to try how clothes feel than test if they get in the way during training, and I can't sleep if it's too hot. Whatever floats your boat. I wish. I usually sink like a rock. They all went to brush their teeth smiling, even Todoroki. He stopped to stare at himself, and rest of the group in the mirror confused. Izuku thought back to the first times he had Tenya and Hitoshi over able to relax with people around without feeling judged or threatened by everyone around. As Izuku put away his toothbrush, he leaned closer to Todoroki. How are you feeling? I'm not sure, good. Safe? Izuku asked. The group around them realized to fall quiet at that point. I think yes. Todoroki's eyes widened a bit in realization as he said the word. Good. Then it was time to go to bed. Without even saying a word to each other, Izuku and Hitoshi ushered Tenya and Todoroki to the centermost beds. With everyone settled on their spots, Izuku sat on the edge of his bed. Ready to sleep? Yes, Hitoshi responded enthusiastically. His eyes glazed over as the brainwashing took effect. Soon the only ones awake besides Izuku were Tokoyami and Todoroki. So, you okay with this? It seems quite efficient, Tokoyami said, looking at the three people already in deep calm sleep despite all that had happened. Izuku turned towards Todoroki, who seemed more hesitant and didn't meet his eyes. I trust you. That was all that needed to be said, though it made Izuku choke up a bit. A moment later, he was the only one in the building left awake. Rather than lay down, he sat on his bed for a long time, letting his eyes wander from one face to the next while only hearing calm breathing from each person who trusted him enough to leave him in this position as a lone guardian over their sleeping forms. Something squeezed his insides, but he drew a deep breath and pushed that away. Not tonight. Whatever happened in the future, he'd be damned if he failed that trust tonight. He probably was anyway.